Welcome, fellow traveller, to the Sleepless Voyager, where history becomes a gentle sea and time itself rocks like a ship in calm waters. Tonight we set out into Marco Polo's sleepy caravan along the Silk Road. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to leave your familiar home, step into the glow of torchlight and join a caravan that might wander across deserts, mountains and half the world before returning? Have you imagined the sound of camel bells echoing under the stars, the hush of a night when the only map is the sky and the road itself becomes a lullaby carrying you onward? If these slow stories soothe you, you are welcome to like or subscribe, only if it feels right. And perhaps leave a note of where and when you are listening. Each message is like a lantern on this quiet voyage, shining across the dark. Now settle in, breathe deeply, and step aboard. If you drift into dreams before we reach the journey's end, that is perfectly fine. The caravan will continue carrying you gently onward. The year is 1271, and in the city of Venice, torches flicker against the stone walls of the harbour. The lagoon glimmers faintly under the moon, and the air is thick with the smell of salt, tar and pine wood from the ships tied to their moorings. Here, among sailors shouting their last instructions, merchants counting coins by lantern light, and families standing close together as if to hold on to the moment, 3 men prepare to leave. Niccolo and Marco Polo, brothers and merchants long seasoned in travel, and the younger Marco, only 17 years old, tall and observant, his eyes bright with both curiosity and the soft fear of leaving behind everything he's ever known. Venice has always been a city of departures. Its narrow alleys and wide canals seem designed for comings and goings, and the water carries both travellers and stories. Yet this departure feels different, even for a city accustomed to voyages. They are not merely crossing to Constantinople or Alexandria. They are not bound only for familiar markets of cloth, wine, or spice. They are setting out toward Persia, toward Cathay, toward lands that, in Venetian imagination, are embroidered with silk, lit with strange lamps, and ruled by kings whose names roll like thunder. You can almost see Marco standing at the edge of the quay, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder, the flame of a torch reflected in his dark eyes. Around him the air hums with overlapping sounds, the creak of ropes straining against stone posts, the occasional laugh of a sailor, the low murmur of prayers whispered by women blessing husbands and sons before departure. The water itself seems to sigh, slapping softly against the sides of the vessels as if reluctant to let them go. The Polo family has chosen the land route, though they will begin first by sea. Their plan is to travel eastward across the Mediterranean, to Acre and then further, and eventually join caravans bound across Persia and the deserts beyond. A sailor, old and bent, shakes his head when he hears of their plan. He mutters something about sands that sing and swallow men whole. And Marco, not yet hardened by years of travel, listens with wide eyes. Perhaps he shivers a little, though he does not admit it. For every young traveller, fear and wonder ride side by side, like twin shadows cast by the same torch. The fire crackles in a brazier near the docks, casting a glow on their faces. Niccolo speaks softly to his son, telling him that the world is larger than any map, and that no story is ever enough until you have walked the road yourself. Maffeo checks their goods, tightening straps, securing bolts of cloth and small chests of jewels, gifts and tokens for distant courts. Marco runs his fingers across the wooden surface of one crate, tracing patterns in the rough grain, and wonders if the road ahead will leave marks on him in the same way, quiet and permanent. Venice itself seems to lean in to listen. From distant towers, bells mark the hour. A cool wind drifts from the lagoon, carrying the smell of wet reeds and distant fires from fishermen's huts. Somewhere a dog barks, sharp and brief, and then falls silent, as though even the animals sense that something significant is unfolding. The lanterns of the dock sway in the breeze, their light trembling on the water and for a moment the reflection looks like a line of stars leading eastward. It is easy to imagine that the city itself is giving the travellers a path, a ribbon of light to follow out of familiar canals into the unknown. And you, listening now, can close your eyes and picture yourself at Marco's side. Feel the warmth of the fire at your back, the cool breath of sea air on your face, the press of the leather strap against your shoulder, as if you too carried a satchel filled with notebooks and pens, ready to record wonders no one in Venice has ever seen. You might hear your own heartbeat echo the slow beat of the waves, as though the sea itself were a drum preparing to send you onward. The journey will be long, years, not months, across deserts that whisper, over mountains whose passes vanish under snow, through cities whose markets blaze with colours no Venetian painter could ever capture. But for now, the story begins here, in firelight, in salt air, in the hush of departure. The young Marco steps onto the boat, the ropes are loosened, and the lanterns of Venice slowly fall behind, replaced by the darker, wider lanterns of the stars. And so the caravan begins, not on sand, but on water, guided by moonlight and the quiet certainty that every great journey starts with the courage to leave one's own familiar shore. The ship moves slowly away from Venice, and the lagoon begins to fade into mist and darkness, its lights trembling like a cluster of candles left behind in a window. Marco leans against the railing, listening to the rhythmic creak of the wooden boards, the occasional snap of a rope adjusting to the pull of the tide, and the soft slap of water against the hull. He's leaving behind a city of marble palaces and gilded churches, a city where merchants argue over contracts and where the smell of fish markets and incense mingle in narrow streets, and he is stepping into a world that no map can fully capture. In his hands, folded carefully, lies a map sketched by earlier travellers. It shows the Mediterranean, the shape of Persia, the vague line of the Silk Road bending like a serpent across deserts and mountains. But the paper holds more blank spaces than lines, and those spaces are filled not with certainty but with rumours. Some speak of deserts that sing, of mountains where demons live, of cities where gold is so abundant that even their roofs are made of it. To a Venetian mind, accustomed to bargaining in precise weights and measures, these stories sound both impossible and irresistible. You can imagine Marco tilting the parchment toward the firelight of a lantern, the inked lines trembling as the ship sways, and in the spaces where the paper shows only whiteness, his imagination supplies colours. There he sees deserts glowing like embers, mountains gleaming like crystal, rivers running with spice-scented waters. The map in his hand is geography, but the map in his mind is a dream, and like all dreams, it is half shadow, half light. Venice, in its own way, has prepared him for this. The city itself is a crossroads, a place where Greek sailors bring tales of Constantinople, where Armenian traders whisper of markets beyond the Black Sea, and where Persian merchants speak of roads that lead to Cathay. Marco has grown up hearing these voices, the hum of languages mixing in the air like threads woven into a single cloth. But now he is stepping from listening into living, from stories told by others into a story that he will carry himself. The family's plan is not simple. They will cross the Mediterranean by ship, move inland through Acre, and make their way toward Persia. From there, they will join caravans that wind across deserts and over mountains, linking city to city like beads on a string. The Silk Road is not a single road, but a web, a tapestry of routes that shift with season, empire, and fortune. One day a path might be safe, guarded by Mongol soldiers under the rule of Kublai Khan. Another day it may be treacherous, stalked by bandits or buried under drifting sand. To walk the Silk Road is to step into a living river of trade, always changing, always flowing. Marco studies the map again, tracing his finger along its fragile lines. He notices how thin the ink strokes appear compared to the vastness they are meant to represent. A single curve for a mountain range, when in truth that range will take weeks to cross. A single dot for a city, when that city will hold tens of thousands of people, each with their own languages, markets, gardens, and temples. Already he senses the gap between map and reality, between lines on parchment and the living pulse of the world. And that awareness, gentle though it is, marks the beginning of wisdom, that the world cannot be contained, only approached, only wandered through. At night, the sea seems endless, and Marco feels both small and wide-eyed, like a child holding a lantern in an open field. The stars above form their own map, bright points strung together by sailor's lore. A helmsman shows him how to find the North Star, how to recognize constellations that point eastward. Marco listens, nods, and tries to imagine what it would mean to rely not on streets and towers, but on lights hung in the sky, ancient fires burning at distances too vast to measure. The stars themselves seem to whisper, "Follow us. We will not fail you." The journey has only begun, but already Marco senses that maps are not just paper. They are promises, half kept, half waiting. Each blank space invites not only discovery but also reflection. He wonders, as you might, how many of our own maps, whether drawn on parchment or carried in our minds, are only fragments, sketches waiting to be filled in with lived experience. And perhaps that is the point. A map is not meant to be complete, but to remind us that there is more, always more, just beyond the edge. The sailor who muttered about deserts now leans nearby, puffing at a pipe, smoke curling upward and catching the lantern's glow. He chuckles when he sees Marco still studying the parchment. "A map can tell you where the road begins," he says, "but it cannot tell you how the sand will taste when the wind blows, nor how heavy your feet will feel after days without shade. That, young master, is the part you must learn with your own bones." His voice is half teasing, half kind, like an old man speaking both from memory and from affection for youth. Marco smiles faintly, folding the parchment, realizing that the sailor is right, and so the night deepens. The ship glides forward, lanterns swaying gently, stars reflected in the black water. Marco keeps the folded map tucked into his satchel, but inside him another map is forming, one not drawn with ink but with anticipation. You, listening now, can imagine holding such a map yourself. Edges frayed, corners curled, its spaces filled with possibilities rather than certainties. Perhaps you recall times in your own life when you, too, stepped into a journey without knowing what waited at its farthest edge. For Marco, and for us as we drift beside him, the map is not a set of boundaries but an invitation. And as the sea carries him eastward, the map of dreams grows wider, glowing like a lantern in the dark. The ship glides forward, leaving behind the familiar outlines of Venice, and the air begins to shift. The brackish lagoon water gives way to the deeper, saltier breath of the open Mediterranean. The horizon no longer shows palaces and campaniles, but stretches into a dark, unbroken line where sea meets sky. For Marco, who has spent his life surrounded by canals and sheltered waters, the immensity of the open sea feels both exhilarating and unsettling. The boat rises and falls gently, and with every slow crest the stars seem to dip closer, as if watching this small vessel carry 3 Venetians toward a continent they can barely imagine. By day the sun strikes hard against the deck, painting the planks with gold and filling the air with a tang of tar and hemp rope. Sailors move barefoot, balancing with the ease of long practice, their voices rising in calls that sound almost like chants, each order flowing into the next. Nets dry along the side, their knots rough with salt. A coil of rope rests like a sleeping serpent near the mast. The sea, ever restless, folds and unfolds in shades of blue, at times glittering with silver sparks, at other times heavy and dark like molten metal. Marco stands often at the prow, hair tousled by the breeze, his mind turning over all he has left behind and all he hopes to see. The ship is bound first for Acre, that restless port in the Levant where crusaders, merchants and pilgrims crowd its narrow streets. Beyond Acre lies Hormuz, the great Persian harbour, gateway to lands of silk, spices and jewels. Yet plans are never fixed. The sea and the road beyond it demand flexibility. Even now, seasoned merchants whisper that the Hormuz route is uncertain, that inland caravans may prove safer. Such uncertainty does not trouble Marco as much as it fascinates him. He has always known stories change depending on who tells them, and perhaps journeys are the same, shifting, bending, reshaping themselves according to winds, fortunes and unseen hands. You can almost imagine yourself beside him, feeling the roughness of the railing beneath your palms, smelling the mingled scents of sea spray and drying fish, and watching the wide blue plain roll endlessly before you. There is a rhythm in it, a steady rocking that both lulls and awakens the mind, as if every wave carried a secret syllable in a language only the horizon understands. When the ship stops at small ports along the coast, the world bursts into colour and noise. In Acre, the streets pulse with movement. Merchants shout prices in Arabic, Greek, Latin, and languages Marco cannot yet recognise. Spices lie piled in woven baskets, their aromas colliding in the air, cardamom sharp as a blade, cinnamon warm as bread, saffron glowing like embers. Silk glimmers in stalls, not yet the endless bolts of Cathay, but enough to catch the eye with threads of red and blue. Marco lingers, absorbing it all, while his father and uncle bargain with practiced skill, their hands moving as quickly as their words. The soundscape of the port is dense. Donkeys bray under heavy loads, hawkers cry out promises, coins clink as they change hands, and above it all the cries of gulls circle in the air like a chorus. The boy from Venice, barely grown, drinks it in, his senses stretched wide. He notices the texture of dates drying in the sun, the sheen of oil lamps burning in shaded corners, the bright enamel of pottery stacked high on wooden shelves. Everything seems both ordinary and wondrous, for every common object here carries the aura of distance, of having travelled farther than he ever has. Sailors warn him again of what lies ahead. The sea is easy, one grins, but the land, the land will eat your strength and drink your sweat. Another tells of sand so fine it can swallow footprints before the steppe is finished, and mountains where snow blinds travellers even in summer. Marco listens, half amused, half uncertain. His imagination fills with images, a desert like a living ocean, mountains glittering with ice. He realises that travel is not only about reaching a place, but about carrying these visions in advance, letting them prepare the heart for what the body will later endure. At night, back on the ship, he finds quiet on the deck while others sleep below. The sea spreads out like a mirror for the stars, each crest holding a flicker of light, each trough a deep well of darkness. He breathes in the cool air and feels how vast the world is, how small he is, and yet how connected. Perhaps you too have stood somewhere, on a balcony, on a hilltop, on a quiet road at dusk, and felt the same, that strange blend of insignificance and belonging, of being a single thread in a tapestry too large to see, yet knowing that the tapestry would not be complete without you. The Mediterranean has always been a road of its own, a liquid bridge between continents. To cross it is to step not only from one shore to another, but from one culture into a web of many. Marco feels it already, the sense that he is no longer only Venetian, but also a little bit of every place he touches. Each scent, each voice, each glimpse of colour is woven into him like threads in the fabric he sees merchants carry. And so the days lengthen, the ports change, the sea carries them steadily eastward. Sometimes the horizon blurs with heat, sometimes it sharpens under a sky washed clean by rain. Through it all, Marco stands attentive, learning not only with his eyes but with his whole being. The boy who left Venice is already beginning to shape into a traveller, one who sees maps not as lines but as experiences waiting to unfold. The ship creaks gently into another night, its lanterns glowing softly, its sails catching the breath of the wind. Ahead lies Persia, and beyond that deserts, caravanserais, and roads without end. But here, upon the rolling sea, the journey is already teaching its first lesson, that every horizon, however far, begins with the sound of waves underfoot and the courage to face what waits beyond sight. When the sea voyage ends and the ships are unmoored at last, the Polos and their companions step onto soil that feels warmer, drier and older than the marble quays of Venice. Here the air carries the scent of baked earth, mixed with the sharper fragrance of spices, the faint tang of incense, and the sweetness of dried fruit hanging in markets. This is Persia, land of poets and merchants, of caravans that have for centuries moved along its veins like lifeblood, carrying silk, jewels, words, and prayers from one horizon to another. To Marco, barely beyond his youth, the very ground seems to hum with stories. The port behind them fades into memory as they make their way inland. The road is wide enough for donkeys, horses, and above all camels, those tall, patient beasts whose long lashes blink slowly against the sun and whose steady steps make the earth itself seem to sway. Marco has seen drawings of camels in Venice, but now, standing close, he notices the details. The leathery pads of their feet, the smell of warm fur mixed with dust, the low, groaning sound they make when kneeling to be loaded. He watches as merchants tie heavy bundles of cloth, bales of wool, sacks of grain, and sometimes small chests of precious stones across the camels' backs, balancing the loads with a precision born of long practice. The animals complain in grunts and snorts, but once they rise, they move with slow dignity, their bells jingling in unison, as if the caravan itself were a living instrument. The bazaars of Persia astonish him even more. Imagine narrow streets roofed with wooden beams, sunlight filtering through cracks like golden threads, dust caught in shafts of light and swirling like smoke. Every step brings new colour, carpets of red and blue unfurled like fields of flowers, copper bowls gleaming as if polished by fire itself, shelves heavy with jars of saffron, cumin, coriander. Traders call out prices not in one tongue but in many, the voices weaving together in a polyphony that rises and falls like the tide. Marco, moving carefully through the throng, listens with wide eyes and ears, trying to catch each syllable, each new scent, each curious taste offered on the edge of a stall. He tastes pomegranates, their juice bright and sharp, staining his lips red. He watches a silversmith etch designs into a plate, the point of his tool glinting as it cuts swirls that seem to echo the patterns of the stars above. He pauses at a rug merchant's stall, his fingers tracing the threads, marvelling at the way dyes can turn wool into skies of crimson and indigo. Venice has known wealth, of course, but here wealth feels older, woven into the land itself, rooted in centuries of poetry and trade. It is not merely buying and selling, it is the meeting of worlds in cloth, stone, and spice. At night, the travellers find shelter in caravanserais. These inns, scattered a day's journey apart, rise like fortresses at the edge of the desert. High walls guard a central courtyard where camels kneel, where fires are lit, and where travellers from far and near sit together beneath stars that seem sharper than in Europe, as if the very air were clearer here. When the heavy wooden gates close, shutting out the night, the world outside falls away. Inside, the air is thick with smoke from the fires, with the smell of bread baking on flat stones, with the murmurs of dozens of voices sharing tales of where they have been and where they are going. Marco listens more than he speaks. He hears a merchant from Samarkand describe domes so blue they seem to hold the sky itself. He hears a scholar from Shiraz recite verses of Hafez, the words flowing like water. He hears an old soldier speak of deserts where voices whisper at night, leading men astray. Around the fire, the world feels at once larger and smaller, larger because of the vastness described, smaller because strangers sit shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by the same flames. One evening, a Persian scholar takes out an instrument Marco has never seen. It is small, circular, with delicate markings, an astrolabe. With patient hands, the scholar shows him how the device can measure the height of a star, how it can guide a traveller when the road is nothing but darkness and sand. Marco holds it carefully, the metal cool in his palm, and imagines using it in the endless lands ahead. He realises, perhaps for the first time, that knowledge itself is a kind of compass, as important as food or water. The scholar smiles at his wonder and tells him gently that the stars are the same for all, that east or west makes no difference, the heavens embrace everyone. You can imagine being there yourself, seated on a rug by the fire, the night around you deep and quiet, the gates shut against the desert, the flames warming your hands. You might listen to the jingle of a camel shifting its weight, to the low murmur of voices in half a dozen languages, to the crackle of wood as it gives up its last warmth. Perhaps you hold in your hand a cup of tea flavoured with mint, the steam curling upward, carrying its scent into the cool air. Persia feels like a threshold, a gate into the unknown. Behind lies the Mediterranean, familiar to merchants of the West. Ahead lies the Silk Road proper, winding into Central Asia, across deserts and mountains towards Samarkand and beyond. Marco knows he has crossed into a new chapter, though the ink of it has yet to be written. He lies awake some nights in the caravanserai, staring at the stars through small gaps in the roof beams, and wonders how far those stars stretch, whether they reach all the way to Cathay, to the palace of the great Khan himself. The bells of the camels ring again at dawn, steady and calm. The caravan stirs, packs are lifted, fires die down, and the gates open once more to the endless road. Persia's gates have swung wide, and Marco steps through them into the vastness that lies waiting. As the caravan presses deeper into Persia, the days unfold in long stretches of heat, dust, and measured footsteps. Each morning begins with the groan of camels as they are loaded once more, each bundle strapped tight, each rope pulled taut, until the animals rise reluctantly to their feet. Bells tied to their necks begin to sway in rhythm, and the entire procession moves forward, a thread of sound woven across the silence of the land. The desert sun presses hard by midday, and the horizon blurs with heat, making distant hills ripple like water. Travellers pull their head coverings lower, sip sparingly from water skins, and keep their eyes fixed on the ground ahead. Yet every evening, when the light softens and shadows stretch across the sand, a new rhythm takes over, one that belongs not to the road, but to the resting place. The caravanserai rises on the horizon like a promise. At first it is little more than a shape, angular against the last rays of the sun, but as the travellers draw closer, its form sharpens into heavy walls of stone or mud brick, a fortress-like structure standing alone in the emptiness. The gates loom tall and wooden, iron studs catching the glow of dusk. Entering feels like passing from one world into another, from the vulnerability of the open road to the protective embrace of a sheltered hearth. Inside, the courtyard spreads wide, echoing with the grunts of camels as they kneel to be unloaded, the clatter of hooves on stone, and the voices of merchants calling greetings to one another. Fires are lit in shallow pits, the smoke rising in thin columns toward the open sky. Around the edges of the courtyard lie small rooms and alcoves, simple spaces where travellers can roll out their mats and rest their weary bodies. Above, the first stars begin to pierce the darkening blue, and soon the whole sky glitters with constellations that seem closer here, as if the air itself were thinner and more transparent. Marco takes in these scenes with quiet wonder. Each night feels like stepping into a gathering that has been unfolding for centuries, a timeless ritual repeated by countless caravans before his own. The details shift, the faces, the languages, the particular wares carried, but the essence remains the same. Strangers arriving as individuals, uniting for a night as a community, then dispersing once more at dawn. For a young Venetian used to streets that close around him with water on all sides, the openness of these courtyards feels both strange and comforting, a reminder that safety can take many forms. The food shared each night is simple but nourishing. Flatbreads baked on hot stones, their edges crisp and smoky. Bowls of lentil stew, thick with garlic and onion. Dates passed around in small handfuls, sticky and sweet on the tongue. Water drawn from a well at the heart of the caravanserai, cool and tasting faintly of minerals. Sometimes a merchant produces dried apricots, golden and chewy, or nuts, wrapped in cloth, and the flavours mix into a meal that is humble yet abundant in its own way. Marco, sitting cross-legged beside his father and uncle, chews slowly, savouring each bite, learning that food on the road carries more than taste. It carries gratitude, a recognition that each mouthful is survival, each shared morsel a thread binding companions together. As the fires burn lower, the stories begin. Every caravanserai is a theatre, every courtyard a stage. The performers are the travellers themselves, their tales carried across deserts and mountains, polished by retelling, coloured by memory, sharpened by exaggeration. One man tells of crossing a desert where voices whispered his name until he nearly walked into nothingness. Another swears he has seen mountains so high, their summits are lost in cloud for entire seasons. A woman from the east describes a market where lanterns burn through the night, illuminating silks that shimmer like water under moonlight. Marco listens intently, the firelight flickering across his face, his imagination painting pictures brighter than any parchment map. One evening, an older merchant draws a circle in the dust and begins to recite verses from memory. The circle, he explains, is the world, and within it every road eventually crosses another. Travel long enough, he says, and you will meet yourself, as if you were another traveller on the road. The others nod, some murmuring agreement, others smiling at the metaphor. Marco holds the thought close, sensing that in some way it is true. Already he feels himself changed. Already the boy who left Venice is meeting someone else within himself, someone shaped by camel bells, dust, and firelight. You can place yourself here too if you wish. Imagine leaning back against a stone wall still warm from the day's sun, feeling the heat slowly seep away as the night cools. Picture a cup of tea in your hands, steam curling upward into the stars, the air around you buzzing with voices in languages you may not understand but which still weave a comfort of human presence. The firelight glows on faces, softening their lines, making everyone look both older and younger, as if time itself pauses here at the edge of the desert. The gate is closed, the walls high, and for this one night at least the world outside cannot intrude. In such moments, Marco realises that travel is not only about the places one reaches, but also about the pauses in between, the nights when the road rests, when companions gather, when the world slows enough for stories to rise like sparks from the fire. He lies awake later in the small alcove assigned to his family, listening to the faint hum of voices fading, to the occasional grunt of a camel shifting in the courtyard, and to the silence that eventually folds over everything. The stars, seen through a narrow slit in the roof, seem endless. He thinks of the scholar's astrolabe, of the promise that the heavens belong to all, and feels both, very small and very vast, like a note in an unending song. And so the caravanserai nights pass one after another, forming their own rhythm within the journey. Each day demands endurance, each night offers refuge, and together they weave the fabric of the Silk Road itself. To travel here is not only to walk across miles of earth, but to step in and out of countless human circles. Circles of trade, circles of stories, circles of firelight that hold back the dark. Marco sleeps at last, his dreams filled with images too large for a single night to contain. Images that will carry him deeper into the heart of Asia. The sun climbs slowly, yet in these Persian lands it feels as though the day is always already awake, always already watching from a sky without shade. The caravan moves forward in silence, its steps deliberate, the bells on the camels striking a patient rhythm that does not change whether the path is wide or narrow, whether the air is cool or burning. Marco walks with his head half covered by a cloth, the fabric damp with his own breath, his eyes squinting against the shimmer that rises from the sand. The desert is not empty, as Venetians once imagined it. It is alive with light, with heat, with shifting illusions that trick the mind into believing there are rivers just ahead, lakes glistening only a few minutes away. He has heard of these mirages but never expected them to feel so convincing. Sometimes the sand bends light until it shows a pool where none exists, a perfect mirror that vanishes the moment he blinks. At other times, he sees shapes that look like towers in the distance, as if some city waits just beyond the horizon, only to dissolve into heat waves as the caravan approaches. These tricks, though beautiful, also hold danger. Travellers have followed them, thinking to find water, and wandered away from the path until they never returned. Marco watches carefully, determined not to trust what his eyes alone suggest, listening instead for the bells of the camels and the voice of his father telling him to stay close. Legends follow the caravan just as closely as the dust. Older guides whisper of voices in the night, voices that call a traveller by name, tempting them to step away from the line of the caravan, luring them into the open dark where nothing waits but sand and silence. The men say these voices are djinn, spirits of the desert, or perhaps the echoes of travellers who perished here long ago. Marco cannot tell whether they speak from belief or from habit, for these stories are told with the same calm as a recipe for bread. He listens, curious, but he also feels a shiver run through him, because in the quiet between wind gusts, it is not hard to imagine such voices. The desert itself seems to hum faintly, a vibration too low to be sound, and in that hum he feels both comfort and unease, as though the land itself were speaking in a language beyond his grasp. By day the silence stretches wide. There are no church bells here, no market cries, none of the constant music of Venice's canals. Instead, there is the creak of a leather straps as they rub against each other, the hollow thud of hooves pressing into sand, and the occasional grunt of an animal resisting the weight of its load. The contrast is sharp in Marco's mind. Venice crowded with voices echoing off stone, and here, a vastness so still that even his own footsteps sound too loud. He begins to understand that silence itself can be heavy, that it can press on the mind like heat presses on the skin, and that to walk in the desert is not only a test of endurance, but also a test of thought. The caravan rests at midday, for the sun becomes too fierce to allow steady travel. The camels kneel, grateful for the pause, their long necks bending toward troughs filled with brackish water. Travellers unroll mats under the rare shade of a cloth stretched between poles, and bread is passed around along with dried figs. Marco drinks sparingly from his water skin, savouring each swallow, noticing how even water here carries the taste of dust, as though the desert insists on being remembered. He writes notes in a small book, recording the shapes of mirages, the colour of sand at different hours, the sound of the wind. His hand trembles slightly, not from fear but from the heat radiating upward through the ground, as if he were writing on the surface of an oven. When the caravan moves again in late afternoon, shadows stretch long and the sun softens to gold. It is then that the desert seems less harsh and more majestic, a rolling sea frozen in waves of sand. Dunes rise like gentle mountains, their curves etched with patterns of wind. The travellers move in single file, the line of camels like a necklace laid upon the earth, each bell a note in a song that echoes softly against the silence. Marco gazes upward and notices how the sky deepens into colours unseen in Venice. Not only blue, but a blue so vast it feels alive, shifting toward indigo as the evening approaches. At night, when the caravan halts, the desert reveals another face. Stars bloom across the sky with such clarity that Marco feels he has stepped into a dome made of light. The Milky Way stretches overhead, a river of brightness flowing endlessly. The wind calms, and in the stillness Marco half expects to hear those whispered voices the guides warned about. He listens carefully, and though he hears only the faint sigh of sand shifting under the cooling air, the warning stays in his mind. He pulls his blanket tighter and lies close to the others, comforted by the nearness of his companions, the slow breaths of camels resting nearby, the small fire burning low in the sand. You too can imagine lying there with him, the warmth of the day finally giving way to cool air that brushes across your skin, the stars scattered above so densely that you feel surrounded by them, as though the earth itself had dissolved into the night sky. Perhaps you would hear the faint crackle of the fire, smell the smoke curling upward, and feel the soft grain of sand beneath your hand. In such a moment the world seems both endless and intimate, vast yet close, a paradox that soothes even as it unsettles. The desert does not speak in words, yet it teaches. It teaches patience, reminding every traveller that haste only leads to exhaustion. It teaches humility, showing how easily the horizon swallows ambition. It teaches wonder, for in its emptiness every small detail becomes precious. The taste of cool water, the shadow of a cloud, the sudden flight of a bird across the sky. Marco carries these lessons in silence, knowing that the road ahead will demand more, yet also offer more. As dawn comes, he sees the sun rise not over buildings or towers but over dunes, the first light spilling across the sand in soft pink and gold. The caravan stirs again, bells resuming their gentle chorus, voices quiet but steady. The desert awaits another day, and Marco steps into it, his shadow stretching beside him like a quiet companion. The sands of Persia hold both danger and beauty, and though they whisper with illusions, they also carve truths into the heart of every traveller who dares to walk their length. After the desert comes the climb. The road that once stretched flat and shimmering beneath the sun now begins to rise, bending upward into the teeth of the mountains. At first the change is subtle. The air grows drier, the horizon narrows, the caravan begins to weave along paths flanked by rocky ridges. Then the ascent becomes unmistakable, the ground steepening into slopes covered with gravel, the paths narrowing until they are barely wide enough for a pair of mules to pass. The sand that once burned Marco's skin is replaced by stone that bites cold even in daylight, and every breath he takes feels sharper, as though the air itself has turned to glass. The camels, so steady in the desert, begin to falter on these inclines. Their long legs stumble on rocks, their heavy loads swaying dangerously close to the edge. Traders whisper to one another and make the decision to change animals where the road meets a village clinging to the mountain's base. Here, sturdy mules are hired, their hooves adapted to the crumbling stone, their small bodies more agile on narrow trails. Marco watches as the caravan is rearranged. camels kneeling to be unloaded, mules shifting impatiently, their bells ringing higher and faster than the slow, deep tones of the desert animals. The very sound of travellers changed, as if the road were announcing that a new chapter has begun. By day the sun still shines, but its warmth is fragile here, quickly stolen by the winds that sweep down from snowy heights. Marco pulls his cloak tighter, his fingers stiff from the cold, his breath puffing visibly in small white clouds. He remembers the suffocating heat of the desert and marvels at how the world can change so completely within only a few weeks of walking. Venice, with its gentle lagoon breezes, seems now like another lifetime. Here the mountains are not simply obstacles, but presences, tall, silent, and indifferent to those who try to cross them. The caravan winds higher, the path curling like a ribbon laid across the ridges. On one side, sheer cliffs fall away into valleys lost in shadow. On the other, jagged peaks loom, their tops wrapped in snow that never melts. The crunch of hooves on frost-hardened soil is constant, a slow rhythm that echoes off the stone. At times, the path narrows so drastically that Marco must press himself against the rock, heart pounding as he watches the mules step carefully, their load swaying only a breath from the drop. Yet the animals continue, calm and sure, and gradually Marco's fear settles into a strange trust, a recognition that these paths have been crossed countless times before, and that the mountain, for all its danger, allows passage when approached with patience. At night the cold is fierce. Fires are lit in sheltered hollows, the flames struggling against gusts of wind. Travellers huddle together, sharing blankets, their cloaks pulled over their heads, their words emerging in clouds that drift upward and vanish. The stars are brilliant here, sharper even than in the desert, but they seem to offer no warmth, only a reminder of how small the fire is, how fragile the circle of light. Marco eats bread hardened by the cold and drinks broth warmed only briefly before cooling again. Yet there is a beauty in the hardship. The silence of the mountains is not empty, but solemn, like the hush inside a cathedral, and Marco feels that every breath he takes here is a kind of prayer. One evening, as the fire burns low and most of the caravan has drifted into uneasy sleep, the guide sits beside Marco, his face lined deeply by wind and years. He gestures toward the ridge silhouetted against the moon and says quietly, "Every pass has its own spirit. Some welcome you, some test you, some do not wish you to come at all. You will know which is which by how the wind feels, by how the animals behave, by how your own heart stirs. Listen, and the mountain will tell you whether it allows you through." The words are spoken without drama, only with the steady conviction of someone who has crossed these paths all his life. Marco listens, and though he does not yet understand fully, the thought stays with him, as enduring as the peaks themselves. The journey continues for days, each climb revealing another. Snow begins to appear even in daylight, patches scattered along the trail, then drifts that crunch underfoot. Marco learns to walk carefully, his feet aching, his legs heavy, but he also learns to notice the beauty that hides within the struggle. Icicles hang from rock faces like crystal teeth. Streams frozen at their edges glisten as though paved with silver. Ravens circle above, their calls echoing against the cliffs. Every detail feels sharpened, carved, clean by the cold, and he realizes that beauty here is not soft or generous but stern, demanding respect before it reveals itself. You too can imagine being there, the air thin and crisp in your lungs, your breath visible in the cold, your ears filled with the steady clink of mule bells echoing against the stone. Perhaps you feel the weight of a cloak on your shoulders, the sting of wind against your cheeks, the roughness of rock beneath your fingers when you steady yourself against a cliff. Around you, the mountains loom, ancient and unmoving, yet you sense their quiet acknowledgement, as though they have seen you and accepted your passage for this night. By the time the caravan descends into a valley, Marco feels both exhausted and strangely renewed. The desert taught patience, but the mountains teach humility, reminding every traveller how small they are against stone that has stood for millennia. The guide's words echo within him. Every pass has its spirit. He wonders what spirit has allowed him through this time, and what others wait ahead. As the valley opens, the air softens again, carrying scents of pine and damp earth, and Marco realises he has stepped into yet another world, neither desert nor city, but something in between. The journey has shown him already how quickly the face of the earth can change, and he senses it will change many more times before the road is done. The mountains recede behind him, but their presence lingers in his bones, in the memory of cold air and solemn silence, a memory that will return whenever he looks at peaks rising in the distance. The road descends at last from the mountains, winding through valleys where streams run clear and pine forests stretch across the slopes, and then it straightens again, pointing eastward toward the heart of Central Asia. After weeks of dust, stone, and silence, the caravan stirs with new energy, for ahead lies a city long whispered of in marketplaces and remembered in the songs of poets. Bukhara, jewel of the Silk Road, rises not suddenly but gradually, as if revealing itself in layers. At first there are orchards, neat rows of mulberry and apricot trees, their leaves trembling in the wind. Then come low walls of sun-baked brick, fields watered by clever canals, and small villages where children wave as the caravan passes. And finally, on the horizon, domes of turquoise lift into the sky, gleaming in the light like fragments of heaven placed gently upon the earth. For Marco, this first glimpse feels like entering a dream. Venice has its towers, its gilded churches, its domes of St. Mark's shimmering with mosaic. But here the scale is different, the colours sharper, the lines more fluid. The domes rise like inverted bowls of sky, glazed with shades that shift from deep green to brilliant blue, each tile catching light in a slightly different way, so that the entire structure seems to shimmer as though alive. Tall minarets stand beside them, slender and intricate, patterned with geometric designs that repeat like echoes of infinity. The air hums with sound, the murmur of fountains, the call of muezzins summoning prayer, the chatter of markets spilling into every street. The caravan winds into the city through a gate carved with inscriptions Marco cannot read, but feels drawn to nevertheless, the letters curling like vines across the stone. Within, the streets are narrower than he expected, yet every corner opens into some new wonder. He sees stalls heavy with bolts of silk in colours he's never encountered, yellow as saffron blossoms, red as pomegranate seeds, blue as the domes themselves. Merchants sit cross-legged behind their wares, speaking in Persian, Turkic, Arabic, and sometimes even Greek or Latin, their voices weaving together like threads in a single cloth. The smell of bread baking drifts from small ovens built into the walls, round loaves plastered against the hot clay, their crusts blistered and golden. Beside them, copper pots bubble with soups flavoured by herbs Marco cannot name, but which fill the air with savoury warmth. He tastes one when offered, a broth rich with lamb, lentils and mint, and finds it both strange and comforting, a reminder that food, even when unfamiliar, always speaks the same language of nourishment. Bukhara is more than markets and food, however. It is a city of faiths and ideas, a place where religions meet as naturally as rivers converge. Marco, walking with his father and uncle, glimpses mosques filled with worshippers bowing in unison, their prayers rising like wind. He passes Christian churches tucked into quieter streets, where candles burn before painted icons. He even hears of Buddhist monasteries once thriving here, their bells long silent but their presence still remembered in the stones. The Silk Road is not only a road of goods but of beliefs. And here Marco begins to understand how far ideas can travel, carried not in chests or bundles, but in voices and gestures. One afternoon, he stands before the Kalyan minaret, its towering shaft patterned with brickwork so delicate it seems woven rather than carved. Locals call it the Tower of Death, for in darker times criminals were thrown from its height, yet to Marco it looks not fearsome but serene, its patterns repeating like music, its height reminding him of the fragility of human life against the endurance of stone. He tilts his head back until he nearly loses balance, staring at the top glowing in the sun, and feels again the paradox of travel. That in seeing what is vast one discovers what is small within oneself, and that in recognizing one's smallness one also feels strangely infinite. At night the city changes. Lanterns glow in courtyards, their flames dancing against blue tiles that now shimmer silver in moonlight. The air is cooler, carrying the scent of jasmine from gardens and the sound of water trickling in pools. Travellers gather in caravanserais within the city walls, and here Marco hears tales that sound both improbable and enticing. A merchant from India describes elephants draped in jewels, their tusks painted with colours. A scholar speaks of distant China, where the emperor's court glitters with porcelain, and where paper is not only written upon but used as money. Marco listens, his mind stretched wide, realising that each story is a doorway, and that every city on this road is a library without walls, its shelves made of human voices. You can place yourself in Bukhara too if you wish. Imagine walking beneath those domes, your eyes dazzled by turquoise, your ears filled with the sound of prayer mingling with market cries, your hands brushing against stone carved with patterns that seem endless. Picture yourself pausing at a fountain where water splashes into a carved basin, the droplets catching moonlight, the cool mist kissing your face after a day of heat. Perhaps you find a quiet courtyard, its walls tiled in blue, where the world outside grows hushed, and you realise that even in the busiest city there are corners of stillness waiting to hold you. Marco spends several days here, though time feels blurred, for each morning opens into another cascade of colours, sounds, and stories. He writes notes by lantern light, his words clumsy compared to the magnificence around him, but he knows he must try, for Venice will never believe unless he leaves traces. Yet even as he writes, he feels that words may never capture what the eyes see, what the ears hear, what the heart absorbs. Some things, perhaps, are meant only to be lived. When the caravan departs, Marco looks back once more. The domes shimmer in morning light, and for a moment he feels as though a fragment of the sky itself has been anchored to earth. He knows the road will lead him to Samarkand, to deserts, to wonders beyond counting. But part of him will always carry the image of Bukhara's blue domes, eternal, serene and luminous, a reminder that the world holds beauty both familiar and strange, and that the journey has only just begun. The road from Bukhara to Samarkand is not long compared to deserts or mountains already endured, yet it carries with it an air of anticipation, for everyone in the caravan speaks of Samarkand with a kind of reverence, as though the very syllables of its name were stitched with silk. Traders mention its markets as endless rivers of goods. Scholars describe its schools where knowledge is treated like treasure, and poets praise its gardens as fragments of paradise. Marco listens, his imagination already painting the city before he's seen it, and when at last the caravan crests a hill and the city comes into view, he feels the breath catch in his throat. Samarkand spreads like a jewel across the valley, domes and towers rising above orchards and fields, their colours so vivid they seem to glow from within. The walls are high and strong, a reminder that wealth attracts envy. Yet above the fortifications the city appears less like a fortress and more like a vision. Turquoise domes shimmer in the sunlight, edged with gold, and tall minarets stand like slender candles, their surfaces carved with endless geometries. From a distance, the city seems almost unreal, as if it were a dream laid upon the earth, a dream that might vanish if one looked away too quickly. As the caravan enters through its gate, the dream sharpens into reality. Streets bustle with people of every description. Persian merchants in flowing robes, Mongol envoys on horseback, Chinese artisans selling porcelain, Indian traders offering spices, and Central Asian scholars wrapped in heavy cloaks. The languages weave together into a tapestry of sound, and Marco hears words he knows alongside others he has never imagined, all of them flowing into one another like streams feeding a river. The city is not merely a meeting place of roads, but of worlds, and he realizes with awe that to walk here is to step into the heart of the Silk Road itself. The markets of Samarkand dazzle the senses. Silk unfurls in long bolts, colours shimmering like water in sunlight, crimson, emerald, violet, and gold. Jewels sparkle from trays, some polished into smooth gems, others still rough, their beauty half hidden, waiting for a jeweller's hand. Spices fill the air with their mingled scents. Pepper sharp as fire, nutmeg warm and sweet, cloves carrying a hint of smoke. Traders call out prices, gestures sharp, voices strong, while customers haggle with equal energy, laughter and arguments blending into a rhythm that feels as steady as the camel bells outside the city. Marco walks among them, eyes wide, knowing Venice has markets of its own, but nothing on this scale, nothing with such variety and intensity. He sees also the scholars for which Samarkand is renowned. In courtyards shaded by vines, men gather around manuscripts spread across low tables. Astronomers trace stars in the sand with sticks, explaining how the heavens move like a great wheel. Philosophers debate gently, their voices low but firm, their words carrying across the courtyard like ripples in still water. Marco lingers, fascinated by their devotion, sensing that here knowledge is not only practical but sacred, a gift to be studied and shared. He cannot yet follow all their words, but he recognizes the expressions on their faces, the same mixture of focus and wonder he once saw in Venice, when a craftsman painted gold onto a mosaic, or when a sailor described the sea's hidden currents. Amidst this whirl of trade and learning, Marco encounters a merchant whose eyes sparkle with amusement as he describes lands farther south. He tells of India, where elephants march in processions, their tusks painted with bright patterns, their backs draped with silk and gold. He speaks of animals so large they can carry towers on their shoulders, and of jewels mined from rivers that gleam even in the shadows. Marco listens, astonished, picturing beasts he has never seen, creatures that to a Venetian mind sound half mythical. The merchant smiles knowingly, aware that his words stretch the imagination of his young listener, yet he insists they are true, and Marco writes the story carefully in his notes, determined not to forget. At night, Samarkand glows with another kind of beauty. Lanterns light its gardens, casting soft reflections on pools of still water. The air carries the scent of roses and jasmine, mingling with the smoke of cooking fires and the faint sweetness of burning incense. Music drifts from hidden courtyards, strings plucked gently, drums tapped with quiet rhythm, voices singing in tones Marco cannot understand but which move him nevertheless. The city, busy and loud by day, transforms into something softer by night, a place where travellers and citizens alike find rest beneath the stars. You can imagine yourself walking there, under the lanterns, through streets where shadows are long and the night air is cool. Perhaps you pause beside a pool in a garden, watching the moon ripple across its surface, listening to distant music, feeling that you too have stepped into a dream. The domes gleam above you, silver now instead of turquoise, and the world seems hushed, as if holding its breath in wonder. Marco sleeps in a caravanserai within the city walls, yet he finds it hard to rest, for his mind overflows with images, markets like rainbows moving, scholars tracing stars, merchants describing elephants, gardens glowing under moonlight. He writes until his candle gutters low, the wax dripping onto his notes, and then he lies awake staring at the ceiling, wondering whether he will ever be able to tell this story so that others might feel as he does now. Perhaps words will never be enough, yet still he must try, for journeys exist not only in footsteps but in the telling afterward. As dawn breaks, he rises and steps outside. The city stirs once more, voices rising, smoke curling, colours reappearing with the light. The caravan prepares to depart, for the road stretches on, but Marco lingers, his eyes fixed on the domes glowing again in morning sun. He knows that he will carry this vision forever, that no matter how far he travels, a part of him will always remain in Samarkand, wandering its markets, listening to its music, and marvelling at its magnificence. After the brilliance of Samarkand, with its blue domes and crowded markets, the caravan once more takes to the open road, leaving behind the hum of city life and returning to the slower rhythm of footsteps, hoofbeats, and bells. The departure feels quieter, more subdued, as if the very splendour of the city had pressed gently on everyone's hearts, leaving them thoughtful rather than eager. Marco walks among the travellers, noticing details he had overlooked before, realising that the Silk Road is not only a chain of landscapes and cities, but also a moving world of people, companions bound together by necessity, patience, and the strange intimacy of long journeys. There are Persians with flowing robes, their voices soft and measured, who carry bags of dried fruit and nuts, always ready to share a handful with others when the day grows long. There are Turks with sharp eyes, their horses restless, who seem never to tire of debating the quality of saddles or the strength of leather straps. Arabs travel with them too, speaking in low tones of markets farther west, of ports along the Red Sea, of ships that sail into India with cargoes heavy enough to make the decks groan. Mongols ride alongside, their movements easy and fluid, their ponies small but tireless, their bows slung casually across their backs as though part of their own bodies. Marco realises, as he watches them, that every step of the caravan is stitched together not just by ropes and straps, but by these different voices, accents, and habits, all moving in the same direction even when their thoughts are far apart. He begins to see the caravan as a kind of living tapestry, each traveller a thread of different colour, weaving in and out of the whole, creating a pattern that could not exist without any one of them. By day, the road passes slowly, yet within its monotony lies companionship. Someone hums a tune in Persian, the melody caught and repeated softly by another in Turkic, until the two voices twine together like vines climbing the same wall. When a mule stumbles and a bundle slips, half a dozen hands rush forward to steady it, their gestures wordless but sure. A child travelling with her parents drops a toy carved from wood, and three grown men step aside at once to pick it up, laughing at their clumsy eagerness. These small acts, repeated again and again, form a quiet bond stronger than words. At night, when fires are lit and food is shared, the companionship deepens. Bread is broken into pieces, bowls of stew passed hand to hand, dried fruits and nuts scattered onto cloth spread across the ground. Marco notices that the meals always begin with silence, a pause in which each person seems to acknowledge the simple gift of having food at all. Then the talk begins, light and friendly, voices mingling with the crackle of the flames. They speak of home, of families left behind, of the taste of water in faraway rivers, of the colours of gardens no one else has seen. Each story is different, yet each is offered as though it were bread itself, nourishment for others' imaginations. It is during these nights that humour flourishes most easily. The Persians prefer their tea strong, the Turks insist on spices, the Arabs argue for sweetness, and the Mongols shrug and declare that fermented mare's milk is better than all of them. The debates grow animated, hands waving, voices rising in mock outrage, until laughter breaks the tension and everyone drinks what they prefer, smiling at the absurdity of thinking any one recipe could satisfy them all. Marco, sitting among them, tastes each version, grimaces politely at the Mongol drink, and learns that humour is itself a kind of bridge, binding strangers together in warmth. One evening, an older traveller observes the group with a smile and remarks that a caravan is like a family that did not choose itself, and perhaps that is why it is so strong. Families chosen by blood carry expectations. Families of the road carry only the need to endure together, to survive together, to arrive together. Marco considers this thought and feels it sink deeply into him, realizing that the Silk Road's strength lies not only in its cities and markets, but in the invisible threads of trust that tie one traveller to another. You can imagine yourself among them, seated on a rug spread across the earth, the firelight soft on your face, the air cool after a day of walking. Perhaps you hold a small cup of tea, the steam warming your hands, while voices rise and fall around you, carrying stories and languages you may not understand yet which still weave a sense of belonging. The laughter of companions drifts upward with the sparks, the night sky overhead vast and endless, and you feel, for that moment, part of something larger than yourself. Marco writes in his notes about these companions, not with the detail of a merchant recording goods, but with the care of someone realizing that journeys are carried as much by people as by maps. He describes the man who always has dried apricots to share, the boy who can imitate the sound of mule bells so perfectly that others laugh, the woman who sings lullabies to her child so softly that even the camels seem to quiet as if listening. These details, small and fleeting, form the fabric of memory, and Marco senses they will stay with him long after the domes of Samarkand fade from sight. As dawn approaches and the caravan prepares to move again, the bonds of companionship become visible in the simplest of gestures, one traveller tightening another's strap, someone lending a hand to mount a mule, a shared laugh about last night's arguments over tea. The road stretches out again, long and demanding, but within the rhythm of bells and footsteps there is now a pulse of friendship, soft and steady, carrying them forward. The Silk Road is vast, yet it is also intimate, because every step is taken beside another, every hardship endured in company, every joy multiplied by sharing. Marco learns this slowly, not from any single lesson, but from the accumulation of countless moments, each as small as a spark, yet together bright enough to illuminate the entire journey. On the long roads where days stretch endlessly and the horizon rarely changes, it is food that gives the caravan rhythm, food that marks the pause between walking and resting, food that provides both comfort and survival. Marco learns quickly that to travel the Silk Road is to accept meals that are simple, practical, and shaped entirely by the land itself. Yet even within this simplicity he finds flavours and moments that surprise him, teaching him that nourishment can be both necessity and gift. Every morning begins with flatbreads, baked quickly against hot stones or within clay ovens when such ovens are available. The dough is made from whatever grain can be carried or bought along the way. Wheat in fertile valleys, barley or millet where the soil is poor. And though the loaves are plain, the smell of them fills the courtyard of every caravanserai with warmth. Marco wakes often to the sound of dough slapping against stone, the hiss as it cooks, the laughter of bakers comparing whose bread has risen better, and he discovers that there is nothing more welcome in the chill of dawn than a piece of bread still hot enough to burn his fingers, its crust blistered, its inside soft and steaming. At midday, when the caravan halts to rest against the fiercest sun, dried fruits and nuts are shared. Figs as dark as wine, apricots glowing golden like sunlight trapped in their skins, almonds wrapped in cloth, walnuts cracked open with small stones, All these pass from hand to hand, the sweetness and crunch bringing a spark of life into weary bodies. Marco, unused to such foods in Venice except as rare luxuries, marvels at how commonplace they become here, how traders produce them casually as if from endless supplies, though each handful is precious, carried carefully for weeks across deserts and mountains. He notes in his journal that one can taste the geography of the Silk Road in such food, the fruit of Persia, the nuts of Central Asia, the grain of distant valleys, all gathered in a single palm. Evening meals are heavier, for the nights can be long and cold. Goats or sheep travel with the caravan not only as beasts of burden, but as future meals, and when one is slaughtered, the meat is divided into stews. The pot is filled with chunks of lamb, onions, garlic, lentils, and sometimes herbs gathered from roadside fields, then left to simmer over a fire until the air itself seems thick with fragrance. Marco remembers one night in particular when the pot boiled so vigorously that the steam curled upward into the stars, carrying with it the scent of garlic and mint, and the entire caravan grew quiet as if to honour the meal before it was served. He eats with his hands, dipping bread into the broth, the oil shining on his fingers, the taste rich and satisfying, and he writes afterward that such meals teach not indulgence but gratitude, for hunger makes every bite a treasure. Not all foods, however, are so easily accepted. In one village, the caravan is offered a drink known as kumis, fermented mare's milk, beloved by Mongols and considered both refreshing and strengthening. Marco takes the cup politely, lifts it to his lips and discovers at once that the taste is unlike anything he has known. Sour, sharp, slightly fizzy, with a tang that burns the throat. His father and uncle drink with steady expressions, accustomed by long practice to accepting local customs, but Marco struggles to swallow without grimacing. The Mongol hosts, seeing his face, laugh warmly, clapping him on the back, assuring him that with time he will come to crave it. Marco smiles faintly, not wishing to offend, yet he writes later in his journal that if kumis is the taste of strength, he prefers weakness. Still, he understands the gesture. The sharing of drink is not about liking, but about respect, and in that respect he drinks again, even if his face betrays him. The caravan's food is not limited to what can be cooked or carried. Along the way they encounter shepherds who sell fresh cheese, crumbly and sharp, wrapped in cloth. They buy honey thick as amber from villagers who keep hives near orchards. Sometimes they trade for melons so large that a single fruit feeds a dozen men, their juice running sweet down the chin, impossible to eat neatly but delightful all the same. Each of these moments feels like a small festival, an interruption in the monotony of the road, a reminder that abundance is never far, even in lands where scarcity seems constant. Marco learns too that food is a language of friendship. A Persian merchant presses dates into his hand during a long march, saying nothing but smiling. A Mongol rider offers him a strip of dried meat tough as leather, and though Marco's teeth ache from chewing, he eats gratefully, for he knows it means acceptance. Around the fires, arguments about tea continue endlessly. Some insist on boiling it until it turns nearly black, others add spices until it tastes like a potion, others pour honey into it until it might as well be syrup. The debates are always playful, voices rising, hands gesturing, until laughter spills across the group. Marco joins in, sampling each version, and realises that the act of drinking together matters far more than the recipe itself. You can imagine yourself seated there, firelight warm on your face, a bowl of stew in your lap, bread torn in your hand, voices around you murmuring in languages you half understand yet still recognise as human and kind. The steam of tea curls upward, carrying with it the scent of cinnamon, mint or milk depending on who brewed it. The stars arch above, indifferent yet steady, and for a moment you feel not like a listener but like a traveller within the circle, nourished by the same food, sharing the same warmth. By the time the caravan prepares to sleep, the food has done more than fill the stomachs. It has woven another thread of companionship, another reason for trust. Marco lies awake, the taste of herbs still on his tongue, the memory of laughter still in his ears, and he realises that what is eaten on the road is never only about hunger. It is about connection, about resilience, about carrying pieces of many lands within oneself. The Silk Road feeds not only bodies, but identities, shaping every traveller into a mixture of the places he has walked, the foods he has tasted, the hands with which he has shared bread. The desert by night feels like another world, so different from the day that it seems to belong to a different season, a different life entirely. The sun, which had pressed so heavily upon the travellers, slips away beyond the horizon, and in its absence the air cools quickly, the ground losing its heat like a body exhaling. The caravan halts, fires are lit, mats are spread, and once again a small community takes shape in the vastness. Marco sits among them, wrapped in a cloak, feeling both weary and alert, for the night has its own voice, softer than day but no less compelling. The fire crackles, sending sparks upward into a sky already thick with stars. These stars feel closer than any he has seen in Venice, sharper and more numerous, so many that they seem to press downward, filling the air with light. The Milky Way arches overhead like a road of its own, a silver path stretched across eternity, and Marco thinks to himself that perhaps it is the heaven's mirror of the Silk Road, another caravan moving slowly, endlessly across an infinite expanse. Around him, the faces of companions glow orange in the flames, their eyes reflecting both fire and starlight. When the food has been eaten and the bowl set aside, when tea has been drunk and the first yawns appear, someone always begins to speak. It is as inevitable as the stars rising. Stories surface, called forth by the fire. Tonight an old Persian trader clears his throat and begins, his voice low and deliberate, as though each word must be placed carefully into the circle. He speaks of djinn, beings of smoke and flame, invisible in daylight but roaming freely at night. He tells of travellers who heard their names called out in familiar voices, only to step away from the caravan and vanish forever. Marco listens intently, the fire warming his face while the night presses cool against his back, and though he knows it is a story, some part of him shivers. In the silence of the desert, it is not hard to believe that voices might rise from the sand. Another joins in, this time a Turk, younger and more eager, who spins a tale of dragons said to coil in caves beyond the mountains, their scales shining like jewels, their eyes burning with fire. He gestures with his hands, drawing the shape of wings across the night air, his voice rising as he describes how the dragons guard treasures of unimaginable worth. Some laugh quietly, amused by the extravagance, but Marco watches with wide eyes, remembering Venetian mosaics that also showed dragons, realizing that myths are not confined by borders, that perhaps every culture shares the same creatures dressed in different names. Then a Mongol rider speaks, his voice deep and steady, telling of the spirits of the steppe, ghostly horsemen who appear at night, galloping silently across the plain, their faces hidden, their hooves leaving no trace. He says they are the ancestors watching over their descendants, guiding or warning according to their moods. As he speaks, the fire pops loudly, startling Marco for a moment, and the others chuckle softly. Yet the rider only nods, saying that spirits do not like to be doubted, and the chuckling dies away. The desert grows quieter, as though listening. In the pause that follows, a boy, no more than 10, travelling with his family, speaks up. His voice is small but clear, and the circle leans in to hear. He tells a folk tale his grandmother taught him, about a lonely star who longed to walk the earth. The star begged the moon to let it descend, and the moon, pitying it, allowed it to fall as a single spark. The spark became a traveller, wandering the earth, always searching for a home. Each time it entered a village, it burned too brightly, frightening people, until one night it joined a caravan, where the firelight made it seem ordinary, just another flame among many. There, finally, it belonged. As the boy finishes, the fire flickers, and for a moment it seems as if the spark within it nods in agreement. The listeners smile, some with amusement, others with tenderness, and soon the boy's story lingers in their minds more than the tales of djinn or dragons. You can imagine yourself seated there, the firelight warm against your face, the cool sand beneath your hands, the night air filled with voices carrying tales older than the road itself. Perhaps you tilt your head back and look at the stars, asking yourself whether they seem closer here, whether their silence hides whispers that only the desert can hear. Perhaps you listen to the crackle of wood, the sigh of wind, the faint murmur of companions, and feel that you too are part of this circle, that these stories are being told for you as much as for them. As the tales wind down, silence returns, but it is not an empty silence. It is full of echoes, of images hanging in the mind, djinn of smoke, dragons in jewelled caves, ghostly horsemen, a lonely star finding its place. Marco lies down on his mat, pulling his cloak around him, and though his eyes close slowly, his imagination continues to wander, carrying the stories forward into dreams. He realises that the Silk Road is not only a path across land, but a path across memory and myth, a road where stories travel as faithfully as silk or spice. The fire dies low, the sparks fading into ash, the stars burning on above. One by one, voices fall silent, breaths grow steady, and the caravan drifts into sleep, surrounded by legends as much as by sand. And so the night holds them gently, as though cradling not only bodies but also dreams stitched together by the stories told under the stars. By now the rhythm of the road has become a second nature. Marco no longer wakes startled when the camel bells begin before dawn, no longer hesitates when pulling his cloak tighter against the cold wind, no longer marvels at the strangeness of eating bread baked on hot stones, or figs carried for weeks across dry lands. He's begun to sink into the long patience of travel, the quiet understanding that each day is much like the one before it, and yet every day leaves a new layer on the soul. Out of this patience grows another habit. He begins to write. The Polos carry paper and ink, for merchants are always expected to keep records, lists of goods, weights, and transactions. But Marco turns his pages not only toward commerce, but toward memory. At night, by the dim light of an oil lamp or the fading glow of a fire, he writes in a steady hand, his words sometimes halting, sometimes flowing quickly, always trying to capture the essence of what he has seen. He notes the shapes of domes and minarets, the colours of silks, the taste of food, the sound of mule bells echoing in a narrow pass. He writes not to prove anything, but to preserve the fleeting images before they fade, as if each word were a lantern lit against the darkness of forgetting. His father and uncle watch with quiet indulgence, sometimes amused, sometimes thoughtful. They are men of trade, accustomed to remembering with numbers and bargains. But they do not discourage Marco, for they sense that he is shaping something larger, something that will outlast the goods they carry. Marco himself is not certain why he writes so faithfully, only that he feels an urgency, as though the road is too vast to hold in memory alone. He has learned that stories are as valuable as jewels, that knowledge itself can be a form of wealth, and perhaps his notebooks will one day be the true treasure of this journey. Among the notes he records are things that strike him as almost unbelievable. He writes of markets where people use paper marked with seals and stamps instead of coins, a form of money he has never seen before, described to him by travellers who have come from farther east. At first he cannot believe it. How can something so fragile, so easy to tear or burn, carry the weight of gold? Yet those who speak of it assure him that in the lands of the great Khan, This paper is accepted everywhere, backed by imperial decree, more trusted than coin, more practical than silver or copper. Marco writes the account carefully, knowing that his fellow Venetians will shake their heads in disbelief, but also sensing that the world holds systems beyond his understanding, systems that require only trust to function. He writes also of lanterns, not only those that light caravanserais, but those said to glow in distant cities, hanging by the hundreds, filling the night with colours of red, yellow and green. He imagines streets lit as bright as day, lamps swaying gently in the wind, their glow reflected in canals and pools. Whether these stories are true or embroidered does not matter. He writes them down anyway, believing that even if they are only half real, they capture a truth of human longing, for light against the dark, for colour against the monotony of night. The act of writing itself becomes a meditation. He dips, his pen in ink, the liquid shining briefly before sinking into the page, and in that moment he feels the day distilled into lines. The scratch of the pen is soft, blending with the murmur of voices nearby, with the steady breathing of camels at rest, with the occasional sigh of wind through the cracks of the caravanserai walls. He pauses sometimes to look up, watching the flame of his lamp tremble, and thinks of how fragile both fire and ink are, how easily they can vanish, and yet how much they hold in their brief glow. You can imagine yourself there, seated cross-legged on a woven mat, leaning slightly forward over a small notebook, your face lit by the faint glow of a lantern. Perhaps you hear the faint crackle of fire nearby, the distant mutter of travellers settling into sleep, the soft rustle of pages as you turn them carefully. In your hand, the pen feels both heavy and delicate, each word you write balancing between vanishing and permanence. The lantern beside you flickers, casting your shadow against the wall, and for a moment it feels as though you're not only writing the world, but also being written by it, your own presence inscribed into the journey. Marco reflects often on how words themselves travel like caravans. A story told in Persia may appear again in Samarkand, altered but recognisable, like a merchant wearing a new cloak yet still the same man beneath. Letters and voices move across borders more freely than goods, crossing deserts and mountains with only memory as their pack animal. He begins to see himself as part of this procession, carrying not only spices and silks but also impressions, descriptions, thoughts, lanterns lit in his mind that he hopes to carry home. Sometimes he wonders who will read these notes. Will anyone believe that paper money can replace gold, that deserts whisper with phantom voices, that cities glow with endless lanterns? Will they laugh at his accounts, dismiss them as fables, or will they see in them the possibility of a wider world? The thought both troubles and excites him, for he senses that to write is to risk disbelief, but also to offer wonder. As the fire dies down and the lantern burns low, Marco closes his notebook and lies back, the words still alive in his mind, their glow lingering even after the ink has dried. The night is quiet, the stars steady, and he feels that each page he fills is another small light added to the great constellation of the road. One day, perhaps, those lights will guide others, just as the stars guide the caravan through the dark. For now, they guide him, reminding him that journeys are not only measured in miles, but in the words we carry with us, the lanterns we light along the way. The road winds onward, and soon the land begins to change once more. Fields and orchards grow sparse, villages less frequent, rivers fewer and farther between. Gradually the horizon opens wider, the earth growing dry and pale, until at last the caravan finds itself on the threshold of the Gobi, a desert so vast that its name alone carries weight, whispered by travellers with both awe and dread. Marco has crossed sand before, yet here the emptiness expands to such an extent that the desert seems not a place but an entire world, boundless and indifferent, its silence pressing against every thought. The sand of the Gobi is different from that of Persia. In places it is coarse and strewn with pebbles, in others fine as dust, so light it clings to the folds of cloth and settles into every crease of leather. The dunes rise in long sloping curves, not always high but endless, one wave after another, their edges cut sharp by the wind. The sun above is merciless, yet the air holds a clarity that seems almost crystalline, sharpening the outlines of distant ridges until they look close enough to touch, though days of walking may still lie between. The caravan moves cautiously, for here the margin between life and death is as thin as a thread. Water is rationed carefully, every skin guarded, every drop valued. The guides speak little, their eyes scanning the horizon for landmarks invisible to Marco, but known to them with the intimacy of memory. Sometimes he sees them pause, stooping to study the ground, reading patterns of stone and sand as though they were lines on a page. Marco marvels at this knowledge, this way of navigating a place where maps seem powerless and only experience can save the weary. It is here, in the silence, that the myths begin to surface. Travellers speak of voices heard at night, whispering from the darkness, calling names in tones eerily familiar. Some say these are the spirits of the dead, those who perished in the desert, doomed to wander forever, their voices carried by the wind. Others claim they are djinn, playful or cruel, luring the unwary away from the safety of the caravan. Marco listens, half sceptical, half unsettled, for the silence is so absolute that even the faintest sound stands out, and once, lying awake, he does think he hears something, soft, almost like his own name carried on the wind. He presses closer to his blanket, reminding himself that fear itself can create echoes, yet still he does not sleep easily. During the day, mirages dance across the horizon, shimmering pools of water that vanish as quickly as they appear. Marco has grown used to such illusions, yet in the Gobi they seem more insistent, more elaborate, as though the desert takes pride in deceiving the eye. He sees what appears to be a line of trees waving in a breeze, their trunks dark, their leaves glinting, but when the caravan approaches, the vision collapses into sand. Once he thinks he sees a caravan ahead, banners fluttering, camels swaying, but the figures dissolve in heat haze before he can call out. The guides caution him not to trust what he sees, repeating the old wisdom. The desert plays with sight, but it cannot touch the sound of bells. Follow the bells, and you will not lose the road. At night the stars are even sharper than before, but they seem colder here, distant and unmoved by human frailty. Fires are small, their flames fragile against the darkness, and the circle of travellers presses close around them. Stories once more rise with the sparks, but now the tales are darker, shaped by the fear of the desert itself. One man swears he saw skeletons half buried in sand, the bones of travellers who wandered away and were never found. Another claims that the desert is alive, that it breathes, that the shifting dunes are its chest rising and falling. A guide nods gravely and says, yes, the desert is breathing even now. When it exhales, the wind howls. When it inhales, the silence deepens. The others grow quiet at this, staring into the flames as though listening for the next breath. Marco records these tales in his notes, writing carefully even as his hand trembles with weariness. He does not know whether he believes them, yet he senses that disbelief does not matter here. Myths in the Gobi are not merely stories, but a way of explaining the inexplicable, of placing human shape upon a vastness that resists comprehension. He wonders whether all myths are born this way, from places where silence is too heavy or beauty too immense to be endured without words. You can imagine yourself lying there with him, the sand cool beneath your mat, the stars like ice overhead, the fire flickering at your feet. Perhaps you hear the faint whistle of wind, so soft it could be breath, so steady it could be whisper. Perhaps you feel the hush pressing in, a silence so deep it seems to lean upon your shoulders, reminding you of your smallness. And perhaps you understand in that moment why people speak of djinn, dragons, or desert spirits, for such vastness begs for explanation, even if the explanation is only a story. The days stretch into one another, each one blending into the next, each night echoing with legends. Marco grows used to the rhythm, the long march, the cautious pauses, the fragile fires, the whispered myths. He knows now that the desert is not only a place to be crossed but also a teacher, showing him how thin the line is between endurance and despair, how much strength can be drawn from companionship, how quickly imagination awakens when the world itself speaks so little. When the caravan finally glimpses a distant oasis, a scatter of palms rising from the sand, the relief is almost overwhelming. Water gleams in the sun, real this time, not illusion, and the travellers quicken their pace. Marco watches as even the camels seem to lift their heads higher, their bells ringing brighter. The Gobi has tested them, filled their nights with myths and their days with mirages, but it has also given them a gift, the knowledge that silence can be as powerful as words, and that stories sometimes carry truth even when they are not factual. The fire dies, the stars burn on, the desert breathes, the caravan moves forward. Time equals 1.5 seconds. After days of sand stretching endlessly in every direction, after nights when silence pressed so heavily upon the mind that even dreams seem to whisper of emptiness, the sight of an oasis feels almost impossible, as though it belongs more to legend than to the earth itself. At first, it appears only as a smudge of green against the pale horizon, uncertain and trembling like a mirage. But as the caravan approaches, the smudge gathers substance, palm trees lifting their slender trunks skyward, their fronds swaying gently as if waving to welcome the weary travellers. Then the shimmer of water reveals itself, not vanishing this time but growing clearer with every step, sunlight breaking upon its surface in sparks of silver. The oasis is real, and the relief it brings cannot be measured in words alone. The animals sense it first. Camels raise their heads, nostrils flaring, their pace quickening despite the heavy load strapped across their backs. Their bells, once slow and mournful, jingle with new urgency, a sound almost joyful in contrast to the weary rhythm of the past days. The travellers too find strength they did not know they possessed, their feet moving faster across the sand, their eyes fixed on the promise of shade and water. Marco feels his chest lift, his breath quicken, his very bones aching toward the coolness ahead. He realises then that survival itself has a taste, and it is sweet as the promise of water. When they arrive, the transformation is immediate. The camels kneel eagerly, their long legs folding, their mouths plunging into troughs filled quickly from the spring. They drink with such ferocity that water splashes against their muzzles, dripping down in rivulets that darken the sand. Travellers rush forward with cups and skins, filling them with care, splashing their faces, letting the liquid pour down their throats. The water is cool, slightly mineral in flavour, carrying with it the earth's hidden memory, and to Marco it tastes better than the richest wine of Venice. He drinks slowly at first, savouring each swallow, then greedily, until his father reminds him to pace himself. Even joy must be tempered on the road. Shade is found beneath the palms, where mats are unrolled, fires are lit with gathered wood, and the mood of the caravan shifts from endurance to celebration. Bread is baked once more, figs and dates are laid out in abundance, and laughter rises easily, the weight of silence broken. Marco watches as men splash water on their faces, children wade in shallow pools, women braid each other's hair in the cool breeze. The oasis is more than refreshment. It is renewal, a brief return to the softness of life in the midst of harshness. As night falls, the oasis becomes another kind of wonder. The water reflects the stars so perfectly that it seems as if two skies have opened, one above, vast and endless, and one below, rippling gently. The palms stand as silhouettes, their fronds swaying softly, their shapes doubled in the mirrored surface. Lanterns are hung from low branches, their flames trembling in the breeze, casting golden ripples across the pools. Marco sits by the water's edge, gazing into its depths, seeing not only his own reflection, but the reflection of domes, towers, and distant lands he has yet to reach. He imagines that the oasis is a kind of portal, showing not only the sky but the future, shimmering in the surface as though waiting for him to step into it. Stories, as always, rise with the firelight, but here they are lighter, less haunted by spirits and loss, more coloured with gratitude. A merchant speaks of the generosity of such places, how every oasis is like a hidden jewel strung across the desert, guiding caravans like beads on a necklace. Another tells of a time he was lost for 3 days, water gone, when suddenly a grove of palms appeared, saving his life. He insists the oasis was guarded by angels, though no one else saw them. The others laugh gently, not to mock him but to honour the mystery, for who can say what shapes kindness takes in the desert? Marco notices that even the camels, usually so stubborn and stoic, seem reluctant to leave. They groan when urged away, as though they too long to remain in the cool shade, chewing dates dropped in the sand. The travellers laugh at the animals' protests, but secretly they share the feeling. None wishes to rise at dawn and step back into the long emptiness, yet they all know they must. The Silk Road is built upon such departures, moments of comfort surrendered, rest left behind, movement demanded again and again. You can imagine yourself there, seated under the palms, a cup of water cool in your hand, the night air soft against your skin. Perhaps you hear the gentle lap of the pool, the low murmur of voices, the faint rustle of fronds overhead. You look into the water and see stars multiplied, endless lights shimmering, and you feel that the world itself has bent to comfort you, offering a pause, a kindness, a reassurance that the road is hard but not merciless. Marco writes in his notes by lantern glow, his words steady now, his hand less trembling. He records the oasis not only as a geographical point, but as a memory, a reminder that journeys are not only measured by hardship, but also by mercy. He writes that water in the desert is like forgiveness, like a second chance offered by the earth itself. He wonders whether Venice will understand this, whether those who have never walked the sands can imagine how precious a drop of water can be. Perhaps they will not, yet he writes anyway, believing that words may carry at least a shadow of the truth. The night lingers gently, the fire burning low, the voices fading into the rustle of wind through palm leaves. The oasis holds the caravan like a mother holding her children, surrounding them with comfort before letting them go again. Marco lies down with the smell of water still fresh in his mind, and for the first time in many nights, he dreams not of silence or whispers, but of flowing streams and trees heavy with fruit. At dawn, the bells ring once more, and the caravan rises reluctantly. Water skins are filled, packs strapped, animals urged forward. The oasis recedes behind them, the palms shrinking into a blur, the pool glimmering briefly before vanishing into the horizon. Yet the memory remains, a light carried inside, an assurance that even in the harshest deserts, there are places where life endures, where the earth itself whispers comfort. The road stretches onward, but the travellers walk with lighter steps, their spirits refreshed by the gift of the oasis lights. The desert recedes slowly, as though reluctant to loosen its grip, and then the land begins to transform. The dunes flatten, the sands grow firm, and small tufts of grass appear, sparse at first, then gathering in clusters until suddenly the horizon opens into a rolling sea of green. The Gobi has given way to the steppe, an expanse so vast that Marco feels as though the earth itself, has become an ocean of grass, its waves rippling under the constant breath of wind. After the silence of sand, the steppe seems alive, filled not with walls or cities, but with openness, a freedom so immense it is almost unsettling. The caravan moves forward carefully, for here the rhythms change. The bells of camels are still heard, yet mingled now with the distant thunder of hooves. Horsemen appear on the horizon, riding with astonishing speed, their small ponies carrying them effortlessly across the plains. They come and go like shadows, sometimes circling the caravan, sometimes vanishing as quickly as they appeared, their movements so fluid that they seem part of the land itself. Marco watches, astonished at their control, their ease, their ability to lean into the wind as if born in the saddle. These are Mongols, masters of the steppe, whose presence has shaped the world Marco is now crossing. Their yurts dot the plains, round and white, like clusters of moons fallen to earth. From afar they look simple, yet as the caravan approaches one, Marco notices the careful construction. Wooden frames covered with felt, doors painted red or blue, smoke curling gently from a small opening at the top. Outside, herds of horses graze, their manes lifted by the wind, their numbers so great that the earth seems to move when they shift together. Marco, who has known horses only in small stables or on narrow Venetian streets, marvels at their abundance, their strength, their wild grace. It is here that he learns of the Mongol postal system, a network as vast and precise as the empire itself. Riders travel in relays, stationed at intervals across the steppe, ready to take messages from one to another without pause. A letter can cross hundreds of miles in mere days, passing from hand to hand like a flame leaping from torch to torch. Marco is astonished, realizing that news and commands can move faster here than in many parts of Europe where roads are poor and relays rare. He writes of this carefully, imagining how Venetian merchants would envy such speed, how rulers would marvel at such control. To him, it feels like a kind of magic, though explained by discipline and organization, proof that empires are built not only by swords but by communication. The soundscape of the steppe is unlike any Marco has known. The constant rustle of wind through grass creates a low whisper, a steady background against which all other sounds stand clear. The cries of eagles pierce the air, sharp and commanding, their wings spread wide as they circle overhead. The thunder of hooves rises and falls as riders pass, sometimes distant, sometimes startlingly near, shaking the ground like sudden storms. And within all this, the caravan's own rhythm continues. Bells, footsteps, voices carried by the breeze, fragments of song drifting away into the vastness. By day, the openness can feel overwhelming. The sky stretches so wide that Marco feels dwarfed, as though he is no more than a grain of sand on an endless shore. There are no walls, no forests, no landmarks to anchor the gaze, only the unbroken horizon, always retreating as they move toward it. At first this unsettles him, making him long for the narrow alleys of Venice, where buildings close around and give shape to space. But slowly he begins to sense another kind of comfort. The steppe offers no confinement, only freedom, and in that freedom there is room to breathe, to expand, to imagine without limit. At night the yurts glow faintly from fires within, their light softened by felt walls like lanterns scattered across the grass. Travellers are welcomed inside, seated on rugs, offered bowls of meat stew and fermented milk, the warmth of hospitality cutting the chill of the night air. Marco enters one such yurt and is struck by its simplicity. A central hearth, rugs patterned with intricate designs, a few chests of belongings, everything ordered with purpose. The fire burns steadily, smoke escaping through the small opening above, while the family gathers close, speaking in tones that rise and fall like music. He feels both foreign and at home, reminded that shelter, however shaped, always carries the same essence: warmth, food, and companionship. You can imagine yourself there, seated on a rug within a yurt, the firelight glowing on the curved walls, the air filled with the scent of stew simmering and the faint tang of smoke. Outside, the wind whispers through the grass, the horses snort and shift, and the stars wheel silently overhead. Perhaps you hold a warm bowl in your hands, the steam rising to your face, while voices in a language you do not know murmur kindly around you. You may not understand the words, yet you understand the welcome, and that is enough. Marco writes of these nights with admiration. He notes how the Mongols live lightly upon the land, carrying their homes wherever they go, moving with the herds rather than against them. He reflects that Venice, with its heavy palaces anchored in stone, could never imagine such mobility, and yet here it sustains an empire vast enough to stretch across continents. He realizes that power does not always come from walls or armies, but sometimes from speed, from adaptability, from the ability to move as freely as the wind across the grass. As dawn approaches, Marco steps outside the yurt and looks across the steppe. The horizon is pale with light, the grass glistening with dew, the air alive with the calls of birds. In the distance, riders move already, their silhouettes small against the rising sun, their ponies swift and sure. The caravan stirs, the camels groan, the bells begin again, and Marco feels himself part of a larger rhythm, one that belongs not only to traders and travellers, but to the land itself. The Mongol steppe stretches endlessly before him, vast and unknown, a space of both freedom and discipline, wonder and silence. He breathes deeply, his lungs filled with air sharper and cleaner than he has ever known, and he realizes that this too is part of the journey's teaching. That to walk across such openness is to approach the unknown with both awe and humility, carried forward by hooves, by wind, by the steady beat of a caravan moving ever eastward. The steppe is vast, and with its beauty comes its ferocity. For days the caravan moves easily, the grass bending beneath the wind, the skies high and blue, the air clear as crystal. Then, without warning, the mood of the land begins to shift. The horizon darkens, the light grows strange, and the wind, which has so often sung softly through the grass, turns sharp, tugging at cloaks, flapping tents, and rattling the bells of the camels in uneasy rhythms. Marco senses it before he understands it. The air feels charged, the way a pause feels before an argument begins, and the older travellers begin to tighten straps, adjust loads, and quicken their pace. Something is coming. By midday, the sky has turned the colour of tarnished bronze. Dusk gathers on the horizon, a faint smear at first, then a growing wall rising higher, spreading wider. The sun itself is dimmed, swallowed by a haze that thickens with every passing moment. Marco stares, wide-eyed, realizing that this is no ordinary wind but a storm so immense it seems to stretch across the entire steppe. The guides shout orders, their voices nearly lost already, urging everyone to huddle together to bring the animals close, to cover faces with cloth. The bells of the camels clang wildly as the wind strikes, and then the storm is upon them. The air turns into a living force. Sand and dust whip across the caravan, stinging skin, biting eyes, pressing into mouths and noses until every breath is an effort. Cloaks are pulled tightly, scarves bound across faces, eyes narrowed against the blur. Marco clutches his satchel to his chest, feeling the sand prickle against his skin. Like needles, his body rocking under the force of the gale. He cannot see more than a few steps ahead, only vague shapes moving in the blur. A camel kneeling, a man crouched low, hands covering his head. The sound is overwhelming, not just the howl of wind, but the constant rattle of sand against cloth, leather and stone, a ceaseless hiss that fills the air like a furious whisper. The storm rages on, and time loses meaning. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat heavy. Marco thinks of Venice, of canals where the loudest sound is the slap of water against stone, and he marvels at how far he has come, at how the world can shift from silence to fury so suddenly. He wonders whether the desert storms of Persia were like this, but he knows this is different. This is not the play of wind among dunes, but the raw breath of the steppe itself, a force too vast to be resisted, too wild to be measured. The caravan huddles in a knot, animals pressed together, travellers crouching low, each body shielding another. The storm swallows them, reducing their world to a circle of struggling shapes. The sand creeps into every fold of clothing, coats every surface, fills every cup, grits between teeth. Marco feels it grinding beneath his tongue, scratching at the back of his throat, and he coughs, pulling the cloth tighter across his face. Yet even in the midst of the storm, he senses something strange, an odd rhythm, a rise and fall, as though the wind itself were breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the fury passes. The wall of dust drifts onward, the roar fades into a sigh, and the world emerges again, changed. The sky clears to a dull grey, the grass lies flattened, and a heavy silence settles. Marco blinks, his eyes roar, his skin coated in a fine layer of grit, his mouth dry as stone. Around him others rise slowly, brushing sand from their hair, shaking out cloaks, checking loads and animals. Some laugh shakily, the sound thin but real, a fragile attempt to turn terror into relief. Others sit quietly, staring at the horizon, as though still caught in the storm's grip. In this silence, an elder among the caravan speaks. His voice is soft, almost reverent, as he gazes across the stillness. "This," he says, "is the desert breathing." The others nod, not because they fully understand, but because the words seem to fit. The storm was an exhalation, fierce and unstoppable, and now comes the inhale, the pause, the waiting. Marco thinks of the guide in the mountains who said every pass has its own spirit, and he realizes that the steppe too has its spirit, one that reveals itself not only in grass and horses, but in storms that erase the world and silences that rebuild it. You can imagine yourself there, standing with him as the storm drifts away, the air settling once more, the ground still warm underfoot. You taste the grit on your lips, feel the heaviness of sand clinging to your clothes, hear only the faint rustle of wind returning to its ordinary whisper. Perhaps you sense the relief of survival, the strange calm that comes after noise too great to endure, the comfort of silence restored. In that moment, the storm becomes not only a trial but a lesson, a reminder that fury and calm are partners, each giving meaning to the other. Marco writes that night by a small fire, his ink gritty, his pages smudged by sand. He records the storm not only as hardship but as wonder, for though it tested them, it also showed them something immense, something beyond human measure. He notes the elder's words carefully, the desert breathing, knowing that they capture what fact cannot, that they speak a truth deeper than numbers or maps. He feels, as he writes, that he is not merely travelling but being taught, shaped by each landscape, each fury, each silence. The stars return above, faint at first, then bright, their steady glow more comforting than ever. The caravan settles to sleep, exhausted, yet the memory of the storm lingers, etched into skin and thought. Marco lies awake a little longer, listening to the quiet, feeling the earth slow breathing beneath him, and he wonders how many more storms and silences lie ahead. The long miles of steppe and desert, the nights under stars and the days of heat and wind, all of them slowly converge toward a single destination. For weeks the caravan has heard whispers of the court of the great Khan, a place spoken of in half disbelief even by those who have seen it, a city where wealth and power are gathered not only from one land, but from the sweep of the world. And now, at last, the Polos approach Shangdu, known also as Xanadu, the summer palace of Kublai Khan. The first signs come in banners. On the horizon, bright cloths rise against the wind, their colours deep crimson and gold, bearing symbols Marco does not yet understand, but which flutter with authority. Then the tents appear, not small yurts scattered across the steppe, but immense structures, their felt dyed brilliant hues, their poles carved and painted, their walls lined with silk. They stand like palaces born from fabric, rising above the grasslands, glowing in the sun. Horses graze in endless herds around them, their tails swishing, their manes streaming, while attendants move swiftly, carrying messages, leading animals, preparing fires. The very air hums with activity, alive with the movements of an empire. Marco, who has walked through the crowded piazzas of Venice, who has stood before the mosaics of St. Mark's, finds himself silent, for this sight is unlike anything he has known. He sees pavilions glittering with golden cloth, banners embroidered with dragons, gongs struck to announce the approach of envoys, drums rolling like distant thunder. He hears music drifting on the wind, flutes, strings, voices rising in harmonies unfamiliar yet captivating. The closer they come, the stronger the impression that here the power of the Mongol Empire gathers itself into spectacle, showing not only wealth but the ability to bring many worlds into one. The caravan halts at the edge of the camp, and the Polos are led forward. Marco walks with his head half lowered, trying not to stare too openly, yet his eyes cannot help but follow every detail. He sees guards in armour of lacquered leather, gleaming with brass studs. He sees officials wearing robes of silk embroidered with cranes, phoenixes and clouds. He sees attendants carrying trays of fruit, bowls of rice, cups of tea steaming in the open air. Even the horses seem adorned, their saddles worked with silver, their reins hung with tassels. At the heart of it all rises the palace itself, built of wood but painted and decorated so richly that it gleams like metal. Its roof sweeps upward at the corners, covered in tiles of green and gold, while carved dragons coil along its beams. The doors are tall, framed with bronze, guarded by soldiers whose spears catch the light. Marco stands before it, his breath shallow, feeling as though he has stepped into a dream woven from all the riches of the earth. When they are admitted, the impression deepens. Inside, the hall stretches wide, its pillars wrapped in silk banners, its floor laid with carpets soft beneath the feet. Lanterns hang from the rafters, their flames glowing against gilded surfaces, casting warm light across faces and walls. At the far end, seated upon a raised throne, is Kublai Khan himself, the ruler of an empire that stretches farther than Marco's imagination can reach. His robe shimmers with threads of gold, his eyes steady and sharp, his presence both calm and commanding. Marco bows with his father and uncle, heart pounding, yet he also feels an odd stillness, as though the journey itself has prepared him for this moment. He sees the courtiers standing in rows, their faces composed, their robes flowing like waves of colour. He hears the music of strings and drums, soft but insistent, as if marking the beat of an empire's heart. He smells incense curling from bronze braziers, sweet and heavy, filling the hall with a fragrance that clings to memory. For a long moment, all is silence. Then the great Khan speaks, his words carried through an interpreter, welcoming the travellers, asking of their journey, listening with careful attention. Marco is struck by the balance of power and grace in his voice, by the way authority does not need to shout but can be spoken softly and still command the air. He realises then that the Empire's strength is not only in armies and horses, but also in presence, in the ability to make strangers feel both small and honoured. You can imagine yourself standing there, the hall vast around you, the banners swaying gently, the air filled with music and incense. Perhaps you feel the weight of gold on the walls, the softness of carpets underfoot, the gaze of a ruler who seems to hold the horizon in his eyes. The sound of drums echoes, softly, steady as a heartbeat, while lantern-light glimmers like stars caught inside the hall. You may not understand the language, yet you feel the meaning, the sense of awe, of ceremony, of history unfolding in silence and splendour. Marco writes of this night later, struggling to capture it in words. He notes the golden halls, the silk banners, the music that seemed to echo from the very sky. He describes the great Khan's presence, the way he listened, the way he commanded without effort. Yet even as he writes, he senses that the truth lies not only in description, but in the feeling, the sense that he has stepped into the centre of the world, where all roads converge. As the audience ends and the travellers are led away to chambers prepared for them, Marco feels both exhausted and alive, as if his entire journey has gathered into this single moment. The bells of the caravan, the silence of the desert, the storms of the steppe, all have brought him here, into a hall where the very air seems woven with power. He lies awake that night, listening to the faint echo of drums drifting through the walls, and he wonders whether even dreams will dare to match what his eyes have seen. The days that follow Marco's first audience with the great Khan unfold like pages of a book written in colours he has never seen. Each morning brings new astonishment, each hall, each street, each encounter adding to the growing weight of marvels that Venice could scarcely imagine. He begins to sense that he is walking not in a single city, but in a world that contains all others, a place where ingenuity, abundance and imagination are woven together with the same precision as the silk threads in a tapestry. The first wonder to strike him is money itself. In Venice, gold and silver coins pass from hand to hand, each bearing the weight of its metal, each clinking with certainty. But here, merchants and officials use paper, thin sheets stamped with black and red seals, their surfaces brushed with characters that to Marco look as intricate as lace. He cannot believe at first that such fragile slips can command obedience, that traders will hand over bolts of silk or bags of grain in exchange for something that could be torn or burned. Yet he watches as transactions proceed smoothly, as everyone accepts the notes without question, and he realizes that value lies not only in metal, but in trust, in the decree of the Khan, in the shared belief that paper holds power. He writes this in his notes, aware that his fellow Venetians may laugh, but also knowing that sometimes laughter is the first step toward recognition of truth. Then there is the matter of fuel. In Venice, fires are fed with wood, and wood must be carried from forests, chopped, stored, and burned. Here, Marco discovers something stranger. Black stones dug from the earth that burn hotter and longer than wood, stones that leave the air smelling faintly of metal. He watches as fires blaze, bright from coal, as water boils more quickly, as furnaces roar with heat that seems unending. He writes again in wonder, knowing that back home people will scoff at the idea of rocks that burn, yet here the evidence flickers before his eyes, undeniable and enduring. Porcelain too astonishes him. He has seen pottery in Venice, clay vessels painted and glazed, useful but heavy. Yet here he finds bowls and cups so thin they seem almost translucent, glowing softly when held to the light, their surfaces smooth as water, their patterns painted in blue and red with a delicacy that seems almost impossible. He touches them carefully, half fearing they might dissolve under his fingers, yet they are strong, holding tea and wine without breaking. He imagines how Venice would marvel at such objects, how nobles would pay fortunes for them, and he wonders whether he is holding not merely a vessel, but a fragment of perfection. And then there are the fireworks. One evening, as the Khan's court celebrates a festival, Marco is led into a courtyard where servants prepare strange tubes of paper and bamboo. The crowd gathers, and Marco, curious, watches as a flame is touched to one of the tubes. A moment later, the air explodes with light. Sparks shoot upward, bursting into blossoms of red, green and gold, scattering across the night sky before vanishing into smoke. The noise is deafening, like the roar of 100 cannons, yet the people laugh and clap, delighted rather than afraid. Marco, startled, claps his hands to his ears, his eyes wide, his heart pounding, and then bursts into laughter himself. He writes later in his journal that fireworks are like angry stars, flaring out of jealousy because they cannot shine as steadily as the real ones. It is his attempt at humour, but he means it, for the display leaves him dazzled, torn between awe and amusement. Everywhere he turns there are more wonders. Roads paved wide enough for 10 horsemen abreast. Bridges of stone arching across rivers with such grace that they look like lines drawn by the hand of heaven. Markets overflowing not only with silks and spices, but with fruits unknown to him, with medicines distilled from roots, with scrolls of writing so numerous that they seem to flow like rivers of thought. He walks among them in silence, overwhelmed, his senses stretched wide, his notebook filling with hurried lines. You can imagine yourself there, standing in a market lit by lanterns, porcelain glinting in stalls, paper notes exchanging hands, the smell of coal smoke drifting through the air, fireworks bursting overhead. Perhaps you feel the heat of a brazier warming your face, the smooth edge of a porcelain bowl in your hand, the vibration of laughter running through the crowd as sparks scatter against the stars. The world is bright, alive, larger than any dream you've known, and yet it welcomes you, draws you into its rhythm, invites you to carry a fragment of its wonder within you. Marco learns, slowly, that his role here is not only as guest but as observer and envoy. The Khan, impressed by the Polo's journeys and their willingness to carry news across continents, begins to send them on missions, to speak with rulers, to report what they see. Marco, young yet attentive, becomes a pair of eyes for the empire, recording not only goods but impressions, not only facts but meanings. He writes faithfully, his words sometimes clumsy, sometimes soaring, always driven by the desire to capture what his eyes behold. At night, when the lanterns are extinguished and silence falls over the palace, Marco lies awake, listening to the faint echo of drums fading into distance, the scent of incense lingering in the air. He thinks of Venice, of canals and bells, of narrow streets and familiar mosaics, and he knows that he has crossed into a world that his people cannot imagine. He wonders whether he himself will believe it one day, or whether it will fade into dream. But for now it is real, dazzling and overwhelming, and he carries it within him like a secret flame. After the brilliance of Cathay, after the lantern-lit markets and the fireworks that burst like impatient stars, the caravan must move again, carrying its memories across the long return road. Yet before the bustle of departure, before the ache of saying farewell, there comes a pause, a night unlike any other, when the desert itself seems to hush, offering silence not as emptiness but as a gift. Marco will remember it not for the sights of palaces or the voices of emperors, but for the quiet of the sand beneath the moon. The caravan halts at the edge of a wide plain, the horizon stretching unbroken in every direction. The day's march has ended, fires have been lit, bread has been shared, but now even the flames burn lower, their crackle fading into embers. Camels lie in dark silhouettes, their long necks folded, their breaths slow and steady, rising in soft clouds that vanish into the night. The air carries the faint scent of ash, the faint chill of sand cooling after sun, and above, the moon rises full, silver and serene, casting its light across the earth as though painting it with quiet. Marco sits alone a short distance from the fire, his cloak drawn around him, his notebook closed. He has written enough for the day. Tonight, words feel unnecessary, too heavy for a world so delicate. He simply watches, listens, breathes. The silence here is not the fearful silence of the Gobi, where whispers seem to lurk. It is a silence that cradles gentle as water, allowing thought to drift without urgency. He feels the slow rhythm of his own breath matching the rhythm of the camels nearby, as if the entire caravan has become one body resting together. The moonlight spreads across the dunes, softening every line, turning roughness into smoothness, shadows into gentle curves. The sand gleams pale, almost white, reflecting the sky until it is difficult to tell where earth ends and heavens begin. Marco tilts his head back and lets the stars fill his eyes, and for a moment he feels as though he is floating, suspended between two skies, one above, glittering with constellations, and one below, rippling faintly with moonlit dunes. No stories are told tonight, no songs are sung. The companions, usually eager for tales and laughter, have grown quiet, as though the desert itself had asked them to respect its stillness. Some lean against their saddles, gazing upward. Others lie on their backs, arms folded across their chests, eyes closed but not yet asleep. The hush is not solemn but tender, a collective surrender to something larger than words. Marco senses it and knows that silence can bind people together as strongly as conversation, that to share quiet is sometimes more intimate than to share speech. You can imagine yourself there, seated on cool sand, the warmth of the fire at your back, the glow of the moon in your eyes. Perhaps you feel the slow rise and fall of your own breath, matching the rhythm of the night. You hear the soft sigh of wind brushing across dunes, the occasional creak of leather, the distant grunt of a camel shifting in its sleep. Around you is space unbroken, space that does not demand but simply offers, space that welcomes your presence without expectation. The desert moon holds steady, patient. It does not flicker like flame, it does not hurry like firework. It simply shines, a reminder that calm can be as enduring as brilliance. Marco feels its light sink into him, soothing the edges of fatigue, easing the weight of thought. He remembers the storms that howled, the voices that whispered, the cities that dazzled, and he realizes that all journeys, however rich, need their pauses. Without stillness, even wonders would overwhelm. Without rest, even marvels would become noise. For a long time he sits in this quiet, letting the desert's calm seep into his bones. He imagines that the moon is watching not only him, but all travellers across the Silk Road, shining equally on those bound eastward and those bound westward, holding them gently in its silver gaze. He wonders if the same moon looks down upon Venice at this very moment, reflecting on waters between palaces, glowing against the mosaics of St. Mark's. The thought comforts him, bridging the distance between the world he left and the world he walks now. The night deepens, the embers fade, the breaths of the caravan grow slower, heavier, drifting into sleep. Marco lies down at last, his cloak drawn tight, his cheek pressed to the cool sand. He closes his eyes, but the moon remains, its light filtering through even the thin veil of dreams. In that light, the journey pauses, not ended but resting, waiting for the next step. You too may let the silence hold you. Imagine lying under that same moon, the world hushed, your thoughts softening, your body sinking into stillness. The desert around you is endless, yet it does not threaten. It simply is, vast and quiet, and within its quiet you find your own. The fire fades, the camels breathe, the stars endure, and the moon glows on, patient and eternal. Journeys have a way of folding in upon themselves. After the astonishment of arrival, after the nights beneath golden banners and the days filled with marvels, there comes the inevitable turning, when the traveller must look back toward the road already taken, must carry his steps once more across distances he thought behind him. For Marco, for his father and uncle, this moment arrives slowly, not with fanfare but with the quiet realization that their place is not to remain forever in Cathay. They have served the great Khan faithfully, they have carried his messages, recorded his customs, and marvelled at his wealth, but their hearts, even if they will never be quite the same, still belong to the faraway city of Venice. The Khan, generous and far-sighted, agrees to let them return, though not empty-handed. They are entrusted with a task, to accompany a Mongol princess westward, carrying her safely to a distant marriage. The Polos bow with respect, knowing this charge is both an honour and a burden, for to guard a life so precious is to walk with constant care. Marco feels the weight of it, yet also senses that the road home, while long, will not simply be a return, but another chapter of discovery. Still, there is melancholy in departure. The day they leave, Marco rises early to walk the palace grounds one last time. He gazes at the golden roofs glinting in the morning sun, at the silk banners shifting gently in the breeze, at the courtyards where scholars debate and musicians practice melodies that sound like the wind given voice. He breathes in the scent of incense, lets his hand brush the cool surface of a porcelain vessel, listens to the faint murmur of voices reciting prayers. Each detail feels sharpened, more vivid for the knowledge that it's being seen for the last time. He carries the images into memory as carefully as one might fold a precious cloth, hoping they will not fade. The caravan forms once more, larger now with the princess's retinue, her guards, her attendants, her chests of gifts and treasures. The camels groan as they kneel, the bells chime, the ropes tighten. Marco mounts his horse and glances back toward the palace, its towers receding slowly as the road stretches westward. A part of him wishes to turn back, to stay in the land of paper money and porcelain, fireworks and coal, gardens and lanterns. But the road calls, and he knows that travel is not about possession, but passage, not about holding, but about moving, always moving. The days become a mirror of the past, yet tinged with difference. Rivers crossed before are crossed again, deserts walked once are walked twice, mountains ascended and descended anew, but where once every sight was unfamiliar, now each carries recognition, memory layered upon the present. Marco realizes that the road does not repeat itself, even when retraced. Each step is new because he is no longer the same. The boy who left Venice has been replaced by a traveller, his eyes trained to notice, his ears tuned to listen, his heart stretched wider than he imagined possible. At night, as fires burn low, he feels the melancholy of leaving wonders behind. Companions tell stories of cities they will never see again, of gardens that seemed like paradise, of voices that will fade into memory. One asks softly, "Would you return if you could, or is once enough?" The question lingers in the air, unanswered. For some, once is indeed enough, the memory shining brighter for its singularity. For others, the longing to return burns like an ember that will never die. Marco lies awake thinking of it, knowing that his own answer is uncertain, that part of him longs to see again, and part of him knows that journeys cannot truly be repeated. To walk the same road twice is not to find the same journey, for time itself changes the traveller and the land alike. You can imagine yourself walking beside him, the night wind cool on your face, the sound of camel bells steady in the dark. Perhaps you feel the same quiet ache of departure, the same tension between gratitude and longing. You recall places in your own life that you left behind, places you knew you might never return to, yet which still live within you, folded like silks, carried like hidden treasures. The road may take you away, but memory allows you to keep what you cannot hold. The return is not without beauty. The desert still glows with moonlight. The steppe still ripples with grass. The mountain still stands solemn against the horizon. Yet Marco sees them differently now, not with the hunger of discovery, but with the tenderness of farewell. Each landscape feels like a friend. One last visit before parting, one last conversation before silence. He finds himself writing more slowly, lingering on descriptions, as if to press them deeper into his pages, into his mind. And always, the thought of home grows nearer. Venice lies far beyond deserts and seas, yet the idea of it begins to stir in him. Its canals and bells, its narrow streets, its towers rising from the lagoon. He wonders whether it has changed in his absence, whether those he once knew will still remember him. He imagines stepping once more into the city of water, carrying within him all the marvels of Cathay, and he wonders how it will feel to belong both to Venice and to the road, never fully to one alone. The caravan moves westward under the same moon that once watched it eastward, under stars that know no borders, under winds that care little for direction. The long road home stretches onward, heavy with memory, lightened by companionship, brightened by the promise of return. Marco rides steadily, his eyes lifted to the horizon, his heart divided between what he leaves behind and what he approaches. Such is the nature of journeys. They never end, they only change direction. The road west is long, stretching over mountains and deserts, rivers and seas, each mile carrying the travellers farther from Cathay and closer to the city they once called home. For Marco, the journey feels both endless and fleeting, each step heavy with memory, each horizon pulling him forward with quiet inevitability. Years pass in this slow movement. The faces of companions change, some leaving, some joining, some lost to the road, until at last the caravan dissolves into smaller groups, each peeling away toward its own destination. And then, after 24 years, the moment arrives. The lagoon shimmers before him once more, the towers of Venice rising against the horizon, the city of canals and bells waiting like a dream rediscovered. Marco stands on the deck of a ship, the salt wind sharp in his lungs, and gazes across the water. How strange it feels to see again the domes of St. Mark's, the narrow alleys, the bridges arching over quiet canals. This city seems smaller than he remembered, its walls more fragile, its towers less towering. Perhaps it has changed, but more likely it is he who has changed, carrying within him deserts, mountains, palaces, and wonders that stretch across continents. Venice is home, yet it feels at once familiar and foreign, a place both his own and no longer fully his. When the Polo step ashore, few recognize them. The years have altered their faces, lined them with dust and sun, silvered their hair, deepened their eyes. Their clothes are worn, their manner weathered, and they look more like wanderers than merchants. Even family and neighbours hesitate, uncertain, whispering among themselves, until at last the truth emerges. These are indeed the men who departed so long ago, men thought lost to time, now returned like ghosts from another world. Marco finds the moment both tender and sorrowful. He longs to be embraced, yet he understands the distance years can create. He watches faces shift from disbelief to recognition, from hesitation to wonder, and he realizes that in some ways return is harder than departure. To leave is to walk into possibility. To return is to carry possibility back into the narrowness of the familiar. Still, there is joy too. Old ties are renewed, voices once known now greet him, and slowly the city enfolds him again. The stories he carries, however, are not easily received. He speaks of paper money that holds the weight of gold, of black stones that burn hotter than wood, of fireworks that scatter light across the sky. He tells of porcelain so thin it glows, of palaces draped in silk, of gardens that seem like paradise. Some listen in awe, others shake their heads, smiling politely, thinking his words embroidered by distance. A few laugh outright, insisting that he has let imagination overtake memory. Marco smiles at their disbelief, writing still in his notes, knowing that truth often sounds like fable when spoken beyond its native land. For a time, he returns to the rhythm of Venetian life. He walks once more across bridges, feels the wooden planks of gondolas under his feet, smells the mingling of fish markets and incense in the air, yet he is never quite the same. The boy who once left, with wide eyes, has become a man whose gaze stretches farther than walls can contain. He looks upon Venice with affection, yet he carries inside him the endlessness of the steppe, the stillness of the desert, the grandeur of palaces, the glow of blue domes, the hush of moonlit nights. His heart is not divided, but expanded, containing both home and horizon. Later, in years of conflict, Marco is captured during a naval battle and imprisoned in Genoa. It is here, behind stone walls, that his stories find new life. A fellow prisoner, Rusticello, listens to his accounts, writing them down in flowing prose, shaping them into the book that will carry his name across Europe. Marco speaks, remembering nights under stars, mornings in markets, storms and silences, wonders and myths. He recalls the taste of figs, the cry of eagles, the hum of cities, the voice of the elder whispering, "This is the desert breathing." In the retelling, the journey unfolds again, not in footsteps but in words, a caravan of memory moving across pages. You can imagine him there, seated in a dim cell, his face lit by a narrow shaft of light, his voice steady, his hands gesturing gently as he recalls each scene. Perhaps you hear the scratch of a quill recording his words, the faint echo of guards beyond the walls, the soft hush of silence between sentences. The world outside is small, yet within his mind stretches the expanse of continents, and with each word spoken he travels once more. In this way, the journey continues, long after the road has ended. For Marco, Venice is both beginning and end, departure and return. He carries it within him always, just as he carries the deserts, the steppes, the cities, and the court of the Khan. Memory becomes a folded silk, opened again and again, each time revealing colours still bright, patterns still vivid, stories still alive. He knows that not everyone will believe him, that some will dismiss his accounts as dreams or exaggerations. Yet he also knows that belief is not the only measure of truth. To have walked the road, to have seen, to have felt, that is enough. As the bells of Venice ring once more, Marco listens with a quiet smile. The sound is familiar, yet behind it he hears the echoes of camel bells, the murmur of caravanserais, the thunder of hooves on the steppe, the crackle of desert fires. The city welcomes him home, but the road remains within him, a companion he will never lose. He realizes then that journeys do not truly end when the traveller returns. They continue in memory, in retelling, in dreams carried forward, lanterns lit again each time the story is spoken, and so Venice receives its traveller, older and changed, his heart full of distances, his voice carrying the music of faraway lands. The long road has led him home, yet also beyond, for in him the caravan continues, walking still across the endless horizons of memory. Even after Marco's return to Venice, long after the caravan has reached its final rest, and the bells of home have replaced the bells of camels, the stories continue to wander. Some are written down, others spoken in markets, others whispered over cups of wine in taverns. Yet among them, certain tales always rise to the surface, those that hover on the boundary between truth and fable, stories so strange that they invite both laughter and wonder. These are the marvels, the beasts, the curiosities that cling to Marco's name as tightly as his own footsteps once clung to the Silk Road. One such tale concerns the unicorns. Venetians had long heard of such creatures, noble and delicate, with slender horns rising from their foreheads, beasts of purity that could be tamed only by maidens. Marco, however, describes something rather different. In the Indies, he writes, he saw animals with horns indeed, but also with thick grey hides, heavy heads, and temperaments less graceful than stubborn. They wallowed in mud, snorted loudly, and preferred to charge at intruders rather than bow meekly. These were not the elegant unicorns of European tapestries, but rhinoceroses, yet Marco insists upon his word, calling them unicorns nonetheless. His countrymen laugh at the description, imagining him confused, but Marco only smiles. He knows that truth can wear many faces, and sometimes myth and reality are simply two names for the same thing. Another story tells of birds so vast that their wings darken the sky. In Persia and India, he heard of the roc, a creature said to be capable of lifting elephants in its talons and carrying them into the air. Marco never claims to have seen one himself, yet he repeats the tales with such care that listeners lean forward, half believing, half doubting. He writes of eggs the size of houses, shells thicker than shields, yolks that could feed a village. Skeptics shake their heads, but others wonder, for the seas and deserts are wide, and who can say what lives in places beyond the reach of ordinary eyes? Then there are the black stones that burn. To Venetians, the idea seems absurd. How can a stone, hard and cold, be coaxed into flame? Yet Marco has seen it with his own eyes. Coal, dug from the earth, carried in baskets, fed to fires that roar hotter and longer than any fed with wood. He recalls furnaces blazing, water boiling in great pots, whole quarters of cities warmed by the fuel of stone. He writes of it patiently, certain that few will believe him, but equally certain that disbelief will not erase the truth. Indeed, some laugh at him, saying he has mistaken his words, yet one day, perhaps, they will see it themselves and remember. Porcelain too becomes part of his marvels. To him it is no longer strange. He has drunk tea from cups so thin they gleam. Like ice, he has watched artisans paint delicate patterns with brushes finer than hair. But in Venice, when he speaks of vessels as light as eggshells that glow in lamplight, people stare. They hold heavy clay pots in their hands, chipped and dull, and cannot imagine such fragility paired with strength. Some dismiss it as exaggeration, others lean closer, curious, eager to glimpse a world so far beyond their own. And then there are fireworks, which Marco describes with both awe and humour. He writes of nights when the sky itself seemed to bloom, when sparks burst upward in fountains of red, green, and gold, when the air shook with thunder not from storms but from paper tubes set aflame. He calls them angry stars, laughing as he does, for they flared with jealousy, eager to outshine the heavens even if only for a moment. Listeners chuckle at the image, some nodding in delight, others scoffing, but Marco insists, pointing to his notes, his voice steady with memory. You can imagine yourself hearing these stories, seated in a quiet hall or a busy tavern, the fire glowing, Marco's voice steady but soft. Perhaps you listen to the tale of unicorns turned rhinoceroses, of birds vast as storms, of stones that burn, of porcelain that glows, of fireworks that roar like stars. Perhaps you smile, uncertain, wondering whether to believe, but also realizing that belief is not the only gift such stories offer. They invite wonder, they open the imagination, they remind you that the world is larger than your own doorstep, larger even than your own doubt. Marco understands this. He writes with honesty, yet he doesn't mind the laughter, for he knows that memory itself is a kind of fable, reshaped each time it is told. He knows too that marvels often sound impossible until they are seen, and that sometimes to laugh is only to admit that one has not yet seen enough. He believes that myth and truth walk side by side, that both are needed to tell the story of the world. In his later years, he repeats these tales often, and always he ends with the same phrase, "I have not told half of what I saw." Listeners lean back, some sceptical, some moved, but all aware that they have glimpsed something through his words, a horizon wider than their own, a caravan moving still across memory. You too may take these marvels as you will. Perhaps you smile at the thought of a unicorn wallowing in mud. Perhaps you picture the flash of fireworks as jealous stars. Perhaps you wonder at stones burning or birds vast enough to carry elephants. Whatever your response, the effect is the same. Your mind has widened, your imagination stirred, your heart nudged toward wonder. That is the true gift of marvels, not certainty but possibility, not proof, but the gentle reminder that the world is richer than we know. And so Marco's beasts and marvels wander as far as he once did, carried not by camels, but by words, not across deserts, but across years. They blur the line between dream and reality, between laughter and belief, and in doing so they keep the caravan alive. Journeys do not end so much as they fade, their edges softening, their footsteps dissolving into memory. Marco has returned to Venice. He has told his tales. He has seen disbelief and laughter and wonder in equal measure. Yet even now, long after the last camel bell is rung, the caravan continues in another form. It travels not across deserts or steppes, but across minds, carried by words, carried by dreams, each listener adding their own breath to its endless march. The Silk Road itself becomes more than a road of trade. It becomes a road of memory, a path that stretches not only through space but through time. For Marco, the nights are often filled with echoes. He lies awake sometimes, listening to the silence of Venetian canals, and within it he hears the faint jingle of bells, the crunch of footsteps on sand, the sigh of wind over grass. He closes his eyes, and once again the firelight flickers on the faces of companions, stories rising with sparks into the night air. He remembers the boy who told of a star longing for a home, the elder who whispered of the desert breathing, the laughter at the taste of kumis, the debates about tea, the silence under the desert moon. These moments do not fade. They remain alive, woven into him like threads of silk, carried forward each time he remembers, each time he speaks. And what is a journey, if not the carrying of memory? Goods may be bought and sold, palaces may crumble, empires may rise and fall, but the caravan of stories walks on, moving through generations as steadily as camels crossing dunes. The listener becomes the traveller, the dreamer becomes the companion. The road is unrolled again and again, each telling a new set of footsteps, each memory another lantern lit. In this way, the caravan never ends. You can imagine yourself joining it now. The fire burns low, the camels rest, the stars shimmer overhead, and you find your place among the travellers. Perhaps you feel the cool sand beneath your palms, the warmth of the fire at your face, the hush of the desert stretching endlessly around you. You hear the murmur of voices, soft and steady, and realise that they are speaking not only to each other but to you, inviting you to walk with them, to rest with them, to dream with them. Slowly the road dissolves into starlight. The horizon, once so sharp and demanding, grows hazy, softened by distance, blurred by memory. The bells of the caravan grow fainter, chiming now like lullabies, each note a reminder of footsteps taken, of miles endured, of wonders seen. The camels breathe slowly, evenly, their long sighs joining the rhythm of the night. The moon glows steady, patient, as it did when Marco lay upon the sand holding the silence like a gift. Marco's words, carried across oceans and centuries, find their way even here. He speaks of beasts and marvels, of palaces and deserts, of laughter and silence, and you realise that the journey has not ended but simply shifted form. It lives now in you, in the pictures rising in your mind, in the calm settling into your body. You're both listener and traveller, both here and far away, both at rest and on the road. The fire fades into embers, the stars lean closer, the night deepens. The caravan begins to move again, but this time it walks not across the earth but into dreams. The figures grow dim, their outlines dissolving into silver mist. The camels lift their heads and step forward, their bells ringing softly, their shadows stretching into the horizon. One by one, the voices grow quiet, replaced by the steady hush of sleep. You feel yourself drifting with them, carried gently, your thoughts loosening, your breath slowing, your body surrendering to rest. Journeys never truly end. They simply continue in silence, in memory, in dreams. Marco once wrote that he had not told half of what he saw, and perhaps that is true, but it does not matter. The half he shared is enough to keep the caravan walking, enough to let others step onto the road, enough to remind us all that the world is wider than we know, richer than we imagine, calmer than we fear. And so the story fades, like a lantern dimming, like bells growing distant, like dunes dissolving into moonlight. The caravan carries on, steady and eternal, but you need not follow every mile. You may rest now, letting the road continue without you, knowing that it will still be there when you wake, patient as the stars, constant as the moon, endless as memory. Our journey ends here, though perhaps you've already gone ahead into sleep. If so, that's fine. If you're still with me, I'm glad you stayed. Until next time, let the horizon hold you, and may your dreams sail gently